All right, so guys, we've scooped up, or I suppose they self-scooped up, three of the Ret community figureheads here. So we got MB, Rin, or Reb, and Bolas, guys. Hello. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for being here today. MB, if you want to give a little introduction, let people know who you are, what you do for this lovely Ret community.
Yeah, so I've main Ret since MOP, and I made the Paladin Discord server, Hammer of Wrath, and I've been rating high-end, like world top 50, top 100 world for since MOP, I want to say. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
All right.
Really.
Rin?
Hi, you probably know me from doing the Wowhead Rec Guide for several years. Recently handing it off to Bolas, and I just kind of hang out in Paladin Discord, do whatever I guess is needed, try to help out wherever I can.
So you're the mom of Ret?
Maybe like grandma.
Oh god.
The weird aunt.
Yeah, you know what, I like that. I'll take that.
And Bolas, man, what's up?
Hey, yeah, so like Ren said, I'm doing the Wowhead Guide from Shadowlands going forward. People might have seen the State of Ret post I did a couple of weeks back. But yeah, other than that, I just hang out in the Paladin Discord a lot too.
All right. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming in. So as I was just mentioning just before we started chatting, Ret is definitely a spec I'm a bit more familiar with, so I'm really curious to pick your guys' thoughts on things and where Ret stands, because there's certainly all types of polarizing views right now in the community about where Ret is, how Ret is looking in Shadowlands, etc. In my experience, at least personally, I don't think it's looking too bad yet, but we'll get to that later, and I'm curious to see what you guys say. But as we do with all of these shows, I think it's important to just at least as a bit of context and baseline, start with a bit of history for Ret. Namely what changed going into Legion, because as we talked about earlier, that's exactly kind of where Blizzard just really made this big emphasis on some class and spec redesign. You know, like survival went from range to melee, so some big ones, some not as big redesigns. So I'm not really sure where we stand with Ret. Rin, I know you made some copious notes here on a few things, so why don't you give us a little sneak peek on what exactly happened from Warlords leading into Legion for Ret, if anything at all.
So obviously, most notably, we got artifacts, and from that artifact, we got Wake of Ashes, which I think everybody now would consider iconic for Ret. And we also got Greater Blessings, which are going away, thankfully. I don't know how other people felt about them, but I did not like them. But Legion was 4 years ago, so I don't remember a whole lot outside of that. One of the artifact traits, forget what it's called, but it's getting turned into a legendary, the one that projected Divine Storm forward. So there's a lot of, I guess, sprinklings like that from Legion that we still have.
I think the other things worth mentioning that we lost from Warlords going into Legion was a bunch of mobility options. We got Divine Steed instead of the whole Pursuit of Justice, Lawbrim. What is the Judgment increased to movement speed 1? I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but also Divine Protection as well.
So this is where the wheelchair meme was born. Is this?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. I always forget that we had that because it was just so nice.
Anything you want to add on that, MB, that you remember from Legion, or is that pretty much nail on the head?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the big things are Wake of Ashes got introduced. People loved Wake of Ashes, and that was pretty much it. They took away Divine Protection, gave us Shield of Vengeance, and then made us a slower class, or what feels like a slower class.
So
we also
go ahead.
We also had our cheat death in Legion too. Forget what that was called as well.
Wait,
Divine Intervention, that was really nice.
Ooh, yeah, Auto Bubble. It's a big one.
Auto Bubble.
Oh yeah, that's right. I totally forgot about that.
I just remembered that right now.
Yeah, but that was fun and good. So bye. So basically nothing substantial in terms of a redesign leading into Legion. No new resource, nothing like that. It was just still Holy Power, which Prot had lost at that point, but Ret managed to maintain. How do you guys feel about Holy Power as a resource on Ret?
it would feel weird without it now at this point. I think
Yeah.
people always talk about like loving Wrath, but I think we would be bored if we went back to that. So I don't know. I think if they took it away, it would be kind of a huge overhaul. They'd have to do.
It definitely
for
feels
that
fundamental
board.
to the spec now. Yeah, like
Yeah.
if you want to play Wrath, they'll have Wrath Classic in a year or two.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think,
like 3 or 4, but go ahead.
I mean, I think for the most part, like, if they were probably gonna like, do what they did to shamans and make us go back to being a cooldown based class, I think the class might be like worse off in a sense, because Red Paladin has like very minor ways to like min max in terms of like resource management for like during progression at least, and even trying to get like setups in PvP, I guess. But like, if it went back to being cooldown based, you're just holding cooldowns, right? They're just sitting there able to be pressed freely. It's like, I think it would probably feel worse just to go back to something like that. I don't know if they would give us like an alternative resource. That might be something worth exploring, but for the most part, Holy Power is like pretty fun to play around, like Holy Power and having cooldowns.
All right. Did you want to add something to that, Rin? No?
No,
Oh, okay.
I agree.
Okay. Okay, so nothing really added too much to them in Legion. Can't also say that they were the most represented class in Legion. Spec, obviously they had the Maymays against them with the wheelchair Spec, etc. Once in a blue moon, you'd see one, especially somebody that played it well, and you always hear those stories. Oh yeah, there's a couple good Red Paladins rating. There's a couple good for M+, but the reality is, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong here, but in Legion, they weren't exactly like a meta baseline Spec. Bolas, what do you think?
Yeah, they weren't meta for rating, but I don't think they were as bad most tiers as people's perception probably was for Legion. Like Tuus Garrus, yeah, they were pretty not good. But in Nighthorde or in Taurus, I think you were kind of totally fine to bring a Ret to your raid and they perform really well most of the time, as long as they're a good player anyway.
Okay. So we'll get, because that's always a big meta point, and I'm very curious to discuss that later, community perception and stuff. But that being said, moving into BFA then, did Ret get any love? Was there any changes, additions that helped maybe some of the issues that they had in Legion? What did you guys even think the issues in Legion really were that they were lacking that needed some attention at the start of BFA?
Yeah, no love.
Okay.
It was...
Cool. I'll see you guys next
we lost a
expansion.
bunch of stuff.
I mean, for the most part, we had like a developer that really tried to like reach out to the community, at least reach out to me for like opinions on changes and stuff like that. And he definitely tried his hardest to like make some positive change. Like, I don't think Light's Decree or Empyrean Power would have happened like if it wasn't for like people talking about it, or like a bunch of other changes to abilities, especially like Word of Glory, Selfless Healer, and stuff like that. But otherwise, it sort of felt like, for the second half of BFA, it's like pretty much nothing happened to the class. And I think
it was quite different from the start of BFA, and then when sort of it transitioned, when we got the extra Azerite traits that sort of pumped up, especially our AoE a little bit, because our AoE in Aldia was horrible, and I think that was one of the reasons that the spec was underperformed so badly that tier.
Yeah, I think just at the beginning of BFA, we were like so many other classes where like clearly they had a plan and there was things that they wanted to do, but didn't get fleshed out really completely. I mean, we did get Wake of Ashes as a talent. We got Consecrate as a talent because for some reason people like Consecrate.
Well, Consecrate was the talent in Legion as well. It just wasn't ever taken because it wasn't good.
Oh, true. See, that's how much I don't like Consecrate.
Hey man, I take that.
And then also like they had this thing where they wanted all melee to have like high downtime, and that felt like pretty bad. But I don't think that was specific to Ret. It might have been worse for Ret, but like I don't know why. I feel like that was a huge change for melee across the board at the beginning of BFA.
Okay. So basically nothing for BFA either. So it feels like basically for the past 2 expansions, it seemed like Blizzard was just like, they're good enough. They're fine.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of like incremental changes. Like we've been getting stuff that we want. Like we wanted Hammer of Wrath back, and we got that as a talent, and now it's baseline. So like we're getting these little things that we asked for. It's just over a period. When you're asking or looking at a period of 4 years, it really doesn't seem like a lot. But I don't know, what can you do?
Do you guys think that you need, like, obviously everybody wants a bunch of different small things for their classes and specs. Do you guys feel like it was they were particularly stingy with the things that Red should have gotten? Like should Hammer have been baseline a while ago? Should the changes that you got that took 2, 3, 4 years have happened earlier? Like, why do you think they're so slow about it?
Yeah, I mean, when did the Hammer of Wrath Discord go up? Like right before Legion, right? And then we got it taken away, which felt pretty bad. And then it took us like 2 years of complaining about it to get it back as a talent, and then another 2 years of us complaining about it to get it back baseline for Shadowlands.
What was their reasoning that they took it away, or was there any?
I don't know, because they felt like it. I'm not really sure, honestly. I don't know why, because it. I mean, clearly it's iconic. We named our Discord after it, right? So.
I think for the most part, I think their plan with Legion was to make it so like not every class had like an execute, right? Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I mean that kind of hurts a lot. And then for them to bring it back as a talent, and make Wake of Ashes a talent in BFA, and then seeing pretty much everybody go the entire expansion using almost exclusively those talents. There are some cases where people use like alternative stuff, but like very rarely. I think they kind of looked at that and they're like, you know what, like it's hard to make a competitor with the way these talents are built. We'll just make it baseline and make the boys happy, which they definitely did with that to some extent.
But
yeah, I mean, we're definitely not upset at getting those things baseline, but it does. Go ahead.
But why do you guys think it took so long? Like, do you think you guys had a lack of feedback getting to them?
I don't think it was a lack of feedback. I think the main thing is there's always other specs that have it a little bit worse than us, so they complain a little bit louder and they get fixed first. And then there's another spec that has it a little bit worse than us, so we're always just sort of on the back burner of, Ret's not like totally ideal, but it's not so bad that we need to like really focus on doing a whole bunch of changes for it to make people happy.
Yeah, I think the class was never really in like a horrible spot. Like, it's been bad, but for the most part, it's been like historically middle of the pack, right? Like, we've never been like in-hand shaman level bad or like feral druid level bad, right? Like, it hasn't been like horrible for us. So I think for the most part, they were just like, this class is fine. We'll leave them for the time being, and whatever. We'll deal with them later.
We'll get to it when we get to it.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So then, why do you think that? And if you disagree with this, I mean, obviously, stop me. But we talked about this earlier. Like, why do you think it is that then the community has this perception about Ret and like wheelchair spec and LOL, and like there seems to be a pretty heavy negative thing against Ret. Even when I've played Ret in beta now, right? Like just for fun or to try out changes, people log in and it's like, oh, is Ret actually good now? Are they not crap anymore? And I'm like, I guess, like, I don't know. They feel like, okay. Do you think that's in part because the spec has actually been really crappy and weak and super on the low side, or it's just kind of one of those community things that snowballed and now you're just seen as awful? What do you guys think?
I think that we just haven't really had anything to break that, and it does just snowball really. And then people already don't want to bring melee to things. Why would you bring a Paladin? That type of thing, and it's really hard to break that. I feel like you have to have a tier where you're just like basically broken and be really overperforming in order to break free from that snowball effect, like you said. And we don't have a particularly great overall perception, like attitude wise, either. Like there's definitely a stereotype associated with Ret Paladins, which we don't always do a great job at proving wrong.
Yeah, I think people play into the meme a lot. Like we have, wheelchair emotes in the Discord and everything. Like it's not, people joke about it as well. It's not like just a negative thing. But like Ren said, if we had a tier where Ret was like very good, then it would probably dispel a lot of that perception. But at the same time, it's only very few tiers that Ret is like really bad that sort of gives that perception. Although I think Mythic Plus is a bit of a separate issue as well. Like just talking about rating for that context.
Yeah, I think like looking back on it, a lot of those memes started because like Blizzard was very non-hesitant. Like they were very swift on like taking action against like any potential that like Ret had to be like good or overpowered or anything like that. Things I could think of are like the legendary belt nerf in Legion, Convergence of Fate nerf where they nerfed it by like 75% or something like that. Other stuff like Crusade hotfixes, like Blizzard was very fast to fix stuff that like could even be remotely problematic, like before
they're
could
very
even start
cautious,
up, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Whereas other classes, seemingly can get away with that type of stuff, especially in like modern day, right? Like speak of classes like Fire Mage, for an example.
Yeah.
So what do you need? Okay, so I mean that's usually it kind of leads me into my next question. In a way, you broadly answered it. The question was, how do you change this community perception, right? Some of it is things Blizzard can do, like you mentioned. You all seem to just say, well, Ret just needs one tier to be really good. And that's unfortunately or fortunately often kind of the conclusion that a lot of these shows have reached. The way that people will start playing them is if they're just really good. But more specifically, what do you guys think Ret needs? Is it just a numbers thing? Like, are you mechanically lacking right now? Is it a utility problem? What do you think, Bolas?
Kind of a mix of everything. Like, I don't think mechanically the classes feels bad to play. I think most of the time it's actually pretty fun. Part of the issue with utility stuff is that pretty much all of our utility at this point is shared with prop paladins and holy paladins. So at least for raiding, if you want to bring paladin for the utility, whether that's like blessings or like lay on hands or I don't know what sacrifice or anything like that, you usually better served off bringing a holy paladin than you are bringing us. That's just kind of how it is. It used to be, with greater blessings, wisdom gave us some kind of niche with that, but we don't have that in Shadowlands, so unlucky.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like in terms of like utility, right? Like Ret Paladin has utility, but it's not what's the word for it? Like it's not actually that useful looking back on it, right? Like Ret Paladin doesn't have aura mastery, right? So we don't have the ability to buff Devo like holy paladins do, which is like an insanely strong CD just in general, right? Like we got Sack back, which is fine. Wog became baseline, which was a good ability in in BFA. Allowed us to do a pretty decent amount of healing. Like always thought it was really useful in like progression scenarios and stuff like that. But for the most part, like damage profile, it's like the class is built in a way that all your damage is cooked into like your 20 or 30 seconds of wings, right? And then outside of that, you pretty much do nothing. And for the most part, like that can be pretty useful, right? Like Frost DKs, I feel like having one of the strongest type of bursts, like you can definitely abuse some stuff, right? Having a really strong 2-minute. Fire Mage, another really good example of that. But outside of those windows, you don't really do anything, and it feels pretty bad, especially considering that the class is also just like a slow melee class in general. All those things paired together, it kind of feels like the class has nothing really going for it.
So it's just.
I think it's also.
Go ahead.
I think it's also worth mentioning, like we haven't really had a tier that plays to our utility in a while. Like, what was it? The first tier of WAD. Like, I can think of a lot of times where we use Sack like Bop, which helps a lot, but it kind of is. It's not great that our utility kind of relies on bosses being made around it, more or less. Like Nathria, there's like a ton of bleeds and physical damage, so we might end up using Bop a lot, and it might make us more desirable, but is that good class design?
But to a certain extent, I mean, I agree. You're lacking some utility to the level of, just global utility, like a Devo or, the kind of stuff that Havoc brings. How do you guys feel about Havoc, by the way, as a competitor?
I enjoy playing it as an alt.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. DHs are really fun, but, yeah.
But I was going to say jokes, but not really jokes aside. So other classes just bring a lot more applicable generic raid utility than a more like specialized utility that Ret brings, and it's not that much. But you're not the worst in terms of the utility you bring either, right? Like Windwalker's pretty badly off. But so why do you think that these things don't apply? I mean, you're one of the rare classes and specs that have an immunity too. And we all know the immunity game and how important it is. Every end boss, you always want some immunity, N'Zoth immunities, etc. Like, why is it not that? Like, what else do you think they need, because they have an okay baseline toolkit.
I completely agree. I think it's also just, you can get away with having one less pop if you're, for example, if you really need burst, which is what Ret is supposed to be. You're not going to bring a Ret Paladin. It's not really worth bringing the pop. So I think if they think that our niche is burst, then they need to make sure that we are more than just kind of okay at it. They need to decide what we are and make us good at that instead of like kind of good at everything. And the reason I think we emphasize utility so much is because it feels like, if we're not going to have the damage, if we're not going to have the burst, then this is what we have. And is that supposed to be our thing? If it is, then it's not really strong enough to bring us. So like, I think it's mostly we want Blizzard, like, decide what you want from us and what you want the reason people to bring a Ret Pally is, and like make us good at that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I hear you. So what do you...
Just on the topic of the immunity thing real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's sort of been Ret's saving grace in a lot of situations, especially like on the last boss in Zoth or like on Argus, where Ret probably wouldn't have a raid spot a lot of the time if it didn't have an immunity. So you could, do the Thought Harvester Soaks, or you could do the Chain Immunes on Argus. Like, that's kind of been a niche that's let Ret actually be able to be brought on a lot of bosses like that, where otherwise would be like Enhancement or Feral Tier, that kind of thing.
And I do also want to say real quick, like, it's not like you can't find a raid spot as a Ret Paladin. I don't want to come off like we think that it's a dead spec or something, because it's absolutely not. There's just things that could be improved to, make our life a little easier.
I mean, typically the issues here are like dealing with like the top 1%, right? Like, if you raid at like a world 5,000th level, like, dude, your class doesn't matter. Like, it's more than likely not going to matter when you arrive to the content that's like difficult, quote unquote.
That's
definitely a much more high-end perspective for sure.
But do you guys feel that like trickle down has any effect on you? One of the things we talk about is like, do you have issues pugging keys just because you're a Ret Paladin? Do you get turned down from that? Issues finding raid spots, contrary to what Rin might have just said. Like, do you think that this community perception hurts when you play Ret because you just can't get like any kind of pug keys down, for instance?
Keys, especially, yeah.
Yeah,
like,
but that's also like you're taking up a melee spot,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the whole trickle down thing is like, it definitely plays a big part, right? But again, it's like a thing with like these communities, and you realize that like at the level they play at, like in the lower end, right, it doesn't really matter. Like, odds are content that they're going to be fighting is going to be nerfed anyway. But in top end, like, I don't know, it just bends like people's perspectives a lot, right? So they hear Ret Paladin's bad, Ret Paladin can't do anything. So you don't invite them to your raid, you don't invite them to your keys, and then
so as far as like pugging and finding yourself a raid group and you're not at a top level, like, I really do think that it does need to be addressed at the top level before it will trickle down to people who are pugging Mythic Plus. Yeah, I just don't know if that helps either, because again, you're taking up a melee spot, and there's already so many DPS looking to pug Mythic Plus, so I don't know.
So, I mean, that's kind of part of the meta issue here, though, right? Is on average in a Mythic raid tier, you have usually 3 to 5 melee spots, let's say, right? Like, once in a while, it'll be even worse because you just have a super caster-friendly boss. Once in a very blue moon, you'll have a very melee-heavy boss for whatever reason, right? And the problem is you're competing against very limited melee spots with a lot of melee, like Havoc, like memes aside, Havoc, Warrior, Rogue, that already bring powerful raid-wide support in some way, utility, whatever it may be. So specifically, how do you get Ret, or for that matter, any of these kind of suffering melee to a point where you can just choose between them competitively, right? If the answer is they need more utility, do you guys think we need to move in a direction where every single melee has some kind of unique utility to bring? Or do we start to double down and broaden the utility? Like, should Ret also get the magic debuff that Havoc brings, and that'll make them more worthwhile? Do they just need Devo like Holy Paladin? Like, where do you guys feel direction we should go in with that?
Honestly, I think it's a fight design thing. Like, there's been fights where you can bring a whole bunch of melee and it doesn't screw you. I think it's just they don't design fights around raid comps that most guilds are going to be able to field. Like, I don't know. That's my view on it, at least.
Yeah, and I don't think that it seems like we're putting a lot of emphasis on our utility. I really think we just need to fill a niche. Like, you're not going to get brought to everything all the time, but if we're really strong at something, you know, we should be brought to things that play to that, you know?
You're strong at burst damage, though, right? Like, that's definitely a Ret niche,
yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
But, you know, fire mages are better and not melee, you know? Stuff like that. And I think not just Ret specific, I think it is just good for the game to not have a single class give you attack power or whatever.
You do think that's
I don't
good?
necessarily like that. I don't like that it's one class.
Okay.
And I don't think that's a Ret specific problem. Like, I don't think, you know, I don't know if I agree with one class giving that buff, because it does force you, you know, like you said, if you only have 4 melee spots, it does force you to bring a warrior and demon hunter, right? Which are both not really great tanks, so it's not like they can do that. Neither of them can heal, so you can't have them do that, you know?
I think as well, like, Devo is kind of like a, you know, piece of raid utility like that now, but like I said earlier, you can just bring a Holy Paladin or Prop Paladin and they'll do the same thing or better.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to dip into now that we've kind of identified, you know, core design historically, and now that we've seen, you know, what are their issues? Is it community based? Is it design based? How do we fix this? What do they need for raid and plus, etc. Now we finally move into Shadowlands and the kind of changes or maybe lack of changes that they got moving into SL, and if they really address some of these issues, MB for instance. So we got well, you guys got rather. So blessings are gone. We have Devo. We have auras back. Period. But they're, you know, class wide, obviously not spec specific. So did Ret really get any major changes, MB, that you feel help address some of these issues moving forward into Shadowlands?
I think Sack coming back is definitely a big bonus, right? Like a 30% DR, especially if you use like the Conduit for it in an endurance slot, like, or in a finesse slot. Like, you could have like a 30% DR on somebody at max rank for like 20 seconds, right? Like, that's not something to scoff at. 30% is like a pretty big amount. So Sack was definitely a big help. Auras are kind of a weird story because the only one that's like definitely raid required is Devotion. The other two or the other 3 are like sort of situational or useless in some instances, like Crusader Aura. Like, you don't need that in a raid, right? Concentration could be used for some stuff like Council of Blood and Castle Nathria, and then Retribution Aura is like, you know, like I don't know any single Ret Paladin that actually likes current Retribution Aura. I think that one deserves like a big change.
I don't know if any Paladin that likes it, period. Actually,
yeah, exactly. I don't
just
think
got worse though as an aura.
Yeah, they've also really doubled down on like burst potential in like the last build of the with this class. I mean, for the most part, it's like with single target with execution sentence and final reckoning and stuff like that. And it also gives us like a 1 minute burst window, like a 1 minute CD burst window, a small one at that. But like overall, they're moving in the right direction, but there's still like a lot that's yet to be seen, right? Like, or like a lot that's left to be desired. Like, I still think Devo or Aura Mastery coming back would be like a huge one. But I think then you start running into like some problems of like, you know, class stacking paladins just to abuse stuff with AM. I don't know. I really don't know what else they could do.
Do you mind if I rant about auras for a minute?
Warriors, really? Not okay.
No, auras.
Oh, auras. Okay, you can rant about warriors too if you don't understand.
No, I don't want to talk about auras. I really hate that 2 of the auras that they quote unquote unpruned for us were passives that we had in like the previous expansion. Like, we already had Retribution passive, even though it wasn't, you know, it didn't give you wings, it was just a flat damage buff and damage taken reduced. But we had that as a passive, and we had Crusader as a passive, and now they're just pretending, oh hey, you know, here you go, they're unpruned guys, you get them auras back again. It's like, why do I have to now pick between these when I had these all baseline previously? Especially when stuff like Crusader Aura also applies to Divine Steed. So it's like sort of like a not very obvious nerf to your mobilities, like actual movement. It just really annoys me. Yeah, that's my auras talk.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think it was like Crusader Aura, like I kind of get, but the one that really gets me is Ret Aura. I don't know if you guys feel about that. I think it was super lazy design, and I also feel that it was very, it just completely goes against what auras are meant to be, right? Like philosophically and from a lore perspective, auras are meant to be group support, and you play and it helps your team members and stuff. It's a completely greedy aura. Like I don't know how you feel about that, but
yeah,
you're waiting for a party member to die, you're just gonna sit there staring at your aura bar and your raid frames, wondering when your friend is gonna die, so you can swap off of Devo aura, which makes your friend take less damage, so you can switch on to Ret aura, so you can potentially profit off their death. And
yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of people abusing that kind of stuff. It's actually kind of like, I guess, kind of weird because Rets had Retribution built into the spec since like Legion, right? Like we've been complaining about it nonstop.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's been even more of an uproar because now it's like, dude, now it's affecting Holy Paladins and Prop Paladins. It's like they don't like it either.
Now you know how it feels.
And now I have to make my raid take more damage in order for me to get that benefit, which is a little bit confusing. So.
Yeah, but that's why you have your Holy Paladin sit in Devo, and then you use Retribution.
Yeah, you're right, because there's really not going to be many situations where we're the only Paladin.
It just seems weird that they would approach it that way instead of just, here's 5% AP, right? Or here's like a Thorns effect, that it used to have.
Or anything.
Literally anything except encouraging
even
like gameplay.
If somebody dies, then you take less, your raid takes less damage. I don't need a buff from it. Like I would like to benefit my group if somebody dies. Like if we have to have a mechanic based off of somebody dying.
Yeah, I think the there was like a concept that I thought of like, which is that like Retribution aura should be something that's like, okay, you can include a death mechanic, right? But make sure it's like it gives like a decent boost, but nothing that's abusable. So that way it's like it doesn't require that you bring more than one paladin into a raid. But it also is like nice to have, right? So like let's say you got like, I don't know, like a 3% damage boost when somebody died for like 5 seconds, right? Like that's like a pretty significant like raid DPS increase, right? But it's not abusable because to some extent, like, is it really worth it to have a person like to just have people chain die for like a such a small amount of damage boost, right? Like obviously you can tune like timings and stuff like that, like duration and like percentages and stuff like that, so that way it's not significant, but like something that's like nice to have, right? Like in this case, oh yeah, go ahead.
As far as I know, like it only benefits the paladin that it's on. So if I'm like the third paladin in the raid and I have Ret aura on, it only gives me wings, not all of the paladins in the raid.
No, it's just you. It's a completely selfish aura.
So,
it makes no sense.
Why?
Usually I'm like nice and neutral because I love my paladin too. I will also support this. It is a horrible, lazy design.
And we haven't liked it since its inception, and I don't know why they keep doubling down on it. It almost feels like a waste to talk about it anymore because it's.
Don't do it justice.
Are they ever going to change it?
Bolas, what do you think about SL changes going in? Do you think they help kind of
anything in particular, or
just in general, like the changes like that we've talked about? Because it doesn't really seem like there were that many, right? Definitely a few talent swaps around the tree. You guys have had.
Yeah, I can talk about talents a bit if you want.
Well, we'll get into the more in-depth talent stuff later. Okay. But I mean, just like baseline to the class, or if there's anything super notable in your opinion, like the auras, like do you view them any differently? Do you think that Devo aura is something that's going to help Ret representation in raid, for instance?
Not in raid. Like I said, the whole you just bring a Holy Paladin thing. Outside of that, it's the whole like they say they unprune a whole bunch of abilities, but like a lot of the abilities that we got are not ones that are actually useful for us. Like Consecration is basically gutted. Like you don't even want to press that as a button in your rotation almost ever. It's just so bad, does so little damage. Shield of the Righteous requiring you to actually have a shield equipped to use. Basically never going to use that either, and may as well not even bind it. Like there's a bunch of abilities like this where it looks like you get a whole bunch of extra stuff going into Shadowlands, but like there's not really that much.
Do you think you'll ever use shield? Ever, like as a niche? Here comes
I
a
would be very
massive
surprised.
physical hit on the raid. Shield
If
of the raid
there's
is worth it.
18 mobs that you all want to damage equally with AoE, then you might equip it for the AoE because it's uncapped and Divine Storm's capped. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like when was the last time we had like raid-wide physical AoE damage happen, right? Like it's only going to be used in a scenario where like you need to tank a mob, right? So like let's say a tank dies and like I'd imagine to some extent you'd want to taunt it so it doesn't go around killing range players, but like those are really the only scenarios. Obviously, it probably has to use case in PvP, unless you can't change your weapons in PvP. I don't know, but yeah, I mean they gave us some really useless stuff. Like I don't think solder is like very functional for Ret really, other than like the niche scenario that I mentioned, and then consecrate is like pretty horrible ability. I hate using it.
I don't know why they even put it in.
Well, they put it in for not us, I guess.
I feel
It's that
personally
bad.
attacked.
Why, you like it?
I'm a prop paladin, right? So.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's fine for you at home.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
leads the.
In the context of Red, it's just kind of like, why?
I mean, yeah, the only time I've ever pressed it on Ret is because I literally had no other button to press at that exact GCD moment. So I guess it's like a super minimal filler.
You lead the mobs into consecration, right? Like you know where you're moving, so like you can just drop down your console and stop moving if it has a long CD. Or is it still like a short CD in?
It's 12 seconds, I think. Still.
Oh, isn't it like 6
9.
on live or something like that?
My bad. It's
I don't
9
know.
seconds.
Yeah, so it's like
Who picks consecration?
Yeah, it's like as like a prop out, it's like pretty useful for you, and like like you have control over the mobs, right? Well, like my tank in a random key could just decide to he's like, hey, I'm just gonna start running with mobs, like my consecration is just
Especially
gone.
now, you pick Wake on live, and you get a guaranteed hit, basically, unless you mess up, and usually that's on you.
Okay, so basically a bunch of, this whole like, this isn't just a Ret thing. The whole unpruning. I mean, there's definitely been some stuff that's awesome that's been unpruned, generally speaking, amongst all the classes. But there's definitely been a lot of just useless stuff that I feel was almost just unpruned to kind of, put forth a resume.
Just to do it.
Yeah, just to do it and be like, hey guys, we're unpruning so much, and they're like, everyone's like, oh my god, something. But like, you have like Whirlwind on a Prot Warrior, right? Like, there's just some stuff that makes no sense, and it seems that it was just done to kind of entice people that the great unpruning is happening. Some stuff was good though, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah,
It feels like we lost more than we gained, honestly. Like, that's the biggest issue. It's stuff like Word of Glory as well. When it was a talent, it was, like, really strong. It was like it would do a smart heal on 3 targets, and it would basically full heal your entire Mythic Plus group if you were, in the middle of bursting or something like that. It was actually, like, really good. And before it got the Healing Hands talent, it just did, like, less healing than a Flash of Light, and it was really awful. You'd never, ever want to spend 3 Holy Power on a heal like that.
I literally just used it when I was leveling, and I knew my Holy Power was going to decay anyway.
Yeah.
That's it.
What about so moving into, now that we've moved rather into Shadowlands, there's some arguable systems in place for Shadowlands that some people are affected by, some aren't. So we'll talk about a couple of the hot topics, namely one that was introduced in Shadowlands and definitely does affect Ret. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on the AoE cap. Oh boy.
Hate it.
Because you guys are hard capped at 5 pretty much, right? In fact, the only ability you have, if I'm not mistaken, that doesn't have a cap is Consecrate. Divine Storm capped at 5, Wake capped at 5. I don't know if they capped Final Reckoning.
Wake's not capped at
Wake
5,
is
it
not
just has
capped.
a scaling. Like,
Oh, you're right, my bad. Yeah,
on
that's
each
right.
target.
That's right.
Wake does like
It's-
kind of a lot of damage for a builder, especially.
Is it soft capped Wake? There was
It's
something,
your primary target damage, and then it starts falling off after secondary target.
Oh, okay,
it
that's
always
what-
does the
that's what it
same amount
was.
to the first
So-
target.
That's what it was.
It's just like Havoc, I-beam scaling, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how much you guys, I'm sure have been playing around. Like I said, even I played a bit of M Plus, right? Not to the level you guys play, but how much does this affect you? The AoE cap. How do you view
Indeed.
it? I mean, obviously you hate it, but do you think there's like opportunity for this to like their goal with AoE cap, right, from a design perspective is we want to build niches, right? We want to have AoE specialists, we want to have cleave specialists, so like 2 to 5 targets, whatever. We want to have single target specialists, blah blah blah. So if your main spammable or your main spender for AoE is capped at 5, do you think that might, if they tune it properly, find you a niche for that kind of target cap? Or do you think you're just like gonna get lost to, you know, unholy DKs that are cleaving anything anyways?
That I guess saving grace for us is like we potentially have burst AoE that's uncapped in Sanctified Wrath, and I think Final Reckoning is Final Reckoning uncapped.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So we, you know, if our niche in that situation is burst AoE, then sure. But then, you know, why they cap on Divine Storm? I don't really know how it's going to play out, but I do know it feels pretty bad.
Okay, MB, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think so I was one of those people who was like, oh, you know, like I can get down with an AoE cap for everybody, you know, as long as they tune it properly. Like maybe you could see some good stuff out of this. But you know, I kind of don't have very much faith anymore. I think AoE cap was like sort of a mistake to a certain extent. There might be a little Twitch clip from Mist of Tarnkey flying around with a Ret Paladin losing to all 3 DK specs. You know, don't know who that guy is.
I mean, maybe it turned up, you know, in 8 seconds before.
Yeah. You know, I'm not that big of a fan of like the AoE cap at this point. Maybe it's like a tuning thing. Maybe it's just like from a damage numbers perspective. But if you see people doing those kinds of gigantic pulls in M+, which I'm sure is going to happen still, right? Like you don't, you know, like Ret's not really going to have a place in Mythic Plus, and in like fights where you have like a million ad spawn, like it might not even have a place for that. We still have good burst AoE, but you know, if there's 5 targets, you know, we can burst them pretty well. But that's about the extent that it goes to.
Which I think it's fine if that's what they want us to be, and that's how it stays. I do wonder if it's going to stay though.
What do you think, Willis?
Yeah, basically just the same. I think it's worth noting they did buff the base damage of Divine Storm a little bit to try and compensate for it, but it doesn't really feel like enough. And it's also worth mentioning a lot of the reason our AoE can be quite strong in BFA was based on Ezreat traits. So Light's Decree doing AoE damage, it's basically Sanctified Wrath, but when you're able to stack 3 traits of it, it does a lot more relative damage than Sanctified Wrath does in Shadowlands. And also Imperium Power, having that as an Ezreat trait is a lot better than the current design of Imperium Power as a talent. And having them as Ezreat traits meant you didn't really have to give up the other talents in order to be able to pick them like they are designed now. So I think we're losing more than just target capping as far as AoE is concerned.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's definitely a tricky thing to try and balance, because even if, like, at what point do they keep making your Divine Storm do more and more damage to account for the fact that you're capped at 5, right? At some point it'll get too powerful, but then what if the average pulls in an M+ end up being 10 instead of 7, and they tune around it usually being 7? Like, it's a really weird situation to be in. It does do a butt ton of damage for sure.
Yeah, it does like 2/3 of it Timber's Verdict damage. It does quite a lot now.
Yeah, it's juicy in that sense, but it definitely feels bad that 5 numbers pop up in a group of 15 mobs. The other non-SL native issue, but has always been a prominent issue. I don't want to say super bad in Ret, because there's classes before that, Unholy DK, Arcane, not as much Arcane Mage, and Unholy's getting a bit of attention for it finally now. The GCD issue. Especially with the change to execution sentence, the addition of Final Reckoning, a Covenant ability on top of it, Seraphim introduction in your talent tree now. You can build into a 6 to 7 GCD issue in terms of opening. What do you guys think about that, MB?
Yeah, I mean, I think while Inquisition still existed, there was definitely a big opener gap. I think Final Reckoning having an initial damage aspect to it really helps. It feels like you're actually pressing a damaging ability, because it hits pretty hard relative to what its buff does. So in that regard, it's like pretty well in terms of like a replacement. Execution sentence is like kind of weird because it's like it feels like you're making an investment, right? Like you don't get the damage up front, so it kind of feels like a wasted global. But then after 8 seconds, you feel like a huge damage coming in, like a huge damage explosion. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what really they can do because it feels also kind of weird if they were to make like Seraphim off the GCD or like Execution Sentence off GCD, Final Reckoning off GCD.
They could make Wings
just,
off
like,
GCD.
Yeah, they could go back and make Wings off the GCD. That'd be really nice. Especially the fact that, I mean, does Wings gain like a GCD benefit like Blade Rush does or like Holy Avenger does now? Where like once you press it, you gain something?
You get the free crit from Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm, but that's it.
I mean, yeah, I guess that helps, but I don't know. I'd rather see Blizzard move in a direction where they started taking more abilities off the GCD instead of trying these weird workarounds where you know, they're just like, oh, we'll add these cool new benefits to it so that way you don't have to have it off the GCD, you know, it'll feel nice. And then you still see Unholy DKs complaining about the fact that they have 9 GCD openers.
All right. What do you think, Red? About the GCD?
Just it doesn't make sense to me that they put everything on a GCD to prevent you from just, I don't know, getting every buff up, but then they keep on giving us more buffs. Like there's we potentially will use Execution Sentence, obviously Wings, and then Seraphim or Holy Avenger, both on global cooldown. Seraphim will be worse because you have to build up for the Seraphim, so that's more globals. And Final Reckoning potentially. So you have, you know, I just don't. It's another instance of they don't want us stacking cooldowns or something. I don't know if the philosophy on that has changed. I don't know if that's still the reasoning for the GCD on everything. But then they keep on giving us more buttons to press before you can do damage. I
think historically, again, at least going back to when they first talked about it in BFA, their public reasoning was, well, there was a couple of reasons. One was, frankly, PvP related, right? So you don't just bind 7 things together and one-shot somebody. One was so you can kind of like appreciate the spell, like spell animations and shit like that. And the third one was so that it added skillful, meaningful choice to your decisions. Mm-hmm. Do I heal? Do I DPS, etc. So those were, as far as we still know to this date, those were the public reasons put forth as to why the GCD apocalypse happened. Yeah. I believe from a philosophy perspective, they want you to be in the like no more than 2 to 3 GCD region, including obviously like your Covenant abilities coming in. Red has horribly overstepped that at this point.
Yeah, that seems like a very not my experience.
And I think the ways that they try to approach and fix things is one of 3 things. One is, as MB just said, they try to cake something into it. So Blade Flurry, for instance, didn't do anything before. Now Blade Flurry does a huge hit of damage when you press it. They try to combine 2 abilities together like they did recently for Arcane with a few of them. And then the third option, which, you know, is kind of like the Armageddon nuke option, just like the Covenant equivalent, you know, that's like the last option, nothing else is working, is to finally take it off the GCD, which they're obviously very hesitant to do for whatever reason. Bolas, what do you think?
Yeah, I think part of it is, the opener takes a lot of buttons, but it's not just a GCD issue for that. It's that we just have a lot of buttons to be pressing at our opener now. Like, I was counting the number of binds I had that were DPS abilities or buffs, just purely rotational. I think it was up to 14 now, which is just an insane number for compared to most specs, what they have just for the damage abilities. But the other thing with GCD stuff that I think is the other big issue for us is most of our like defensive and mobility stuff is on the GCD. So Divine Steed is on the GCD, Shield Avengers is on the GCD, Bubbles on the GCD, and most specs don't have that be the thing, like, you know, Blazing on the GCD, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It just it feels like there's a lot of stuff on there that really shouldn't be for us. And yeah, it makes it so that you end up, especially with the Final Reckoning stuff coming in now, it feels like they didn't test that enough and weren't quite aware of how many GCDs it's going to take to do your full opener before you can start doing your quote-unquote normal rotation.
Yeah, I've never really understood Shield of Vengeance on GCD from like a,
It does damage.
I guess. Is that, what about Eye for an Eye? Like, just because it reflects
haven't taken
damage?
it in years, no idea.
So the thing with Eye for an Eye, though, is like, I consider it one of the previously 3 useless talents, but I think it has like decent use case for Castle Nathria. Like, it reduces physical damage by 35% on a 1-minute CD for like 10 seconds, and a lot of bleeds happen in Castle Nathria, and that stuff's physical damage for the most part. So there can be a lot of scenarios where I feel like it could be useful or you could abuse it, but I don't know. I guess
I just don't remember if it's on
sort of up
GCD or
in the
not.
air.
It is
Oh
on
yeah, I
GCD.
have no clue.
Okay.
In fact, I don't think you have a single thing off GCD, except I don't even know if Shield of the Righteous.
Lay on hands.
I think,
though?
yeah, Lay on Hands is off GCD.
Lay on
That's the only
Hands.
one.
Yeah.
Lay on Hands and
Probably Sack. Is Sack off GCD?
Sack is. I'll check it in a second.
Look.
Sack is off GCD, yes.
Okay.
So Lay on Hands, Interrupt,
Cool.
Taunt, and SOTR are off GCD. Ret survivability is actually pretty damn solid, in my opinion. With Eye for an Eye, Shield, Healing Hands that was just recently revamped. We'll talk about that in a bit. Lay on Hands itself, like you have some honestly Bubble, obviously Bubble Bop. Survivability is something that Ret Paladin's actually pretty damn good at, but back to the GCD
It has good
thing.
self-healing, but Shield of Vengeance is not really a defensive ability.
True,
It's more
true.
of a button you press to try and get the most damage out of it.
Yeah.
Because it does a huge amount of damage for a single button press.
Just like
And
DKs
most
with
people are
AMS.
Most people are going to use it to try and gain damage out of it rather than use it for for a mostly defensive purpose. Like if you're on the Zoth and you're running out for the Anguish, you're probably not going to press your Avengers and have it proc not on the boss. You're going to rather try and proc it on the boss, even if it's not, preventing as much damage.
Right.
Use it on the Thought Harvester AoE, and
Yep.
Yeah.
that's often enough.
You
you
can
know?
pad your execution sentence with it now too.
Exactly.
True.
Great.
True. So the GC issue is it's weird because I had my GCD meeting with them. Obviously, everybody keeps tweeting about the GCD, complaining about the GCD. It's been such an issue for 2+ years. And it looks like they finally started to budge, right? Like with Arcane Mage got great changes for the GCD thing. Unholy starting to get some. Hopefully we see more. It's just weird to me that the things they added and did for Ret to try and help some talents and build some more things were here's more GCDs.
Yeah.
So I expect at some point, I hope at least, that Ret is maybe going to get a similar treatment in that direction. But since you mentioned it earlier, Bolas, let's talk about talents. Let's dive a bit more into talents right now. You guys have had quite a lot of talent changes, whether some new additions or some just kind of revamped, remade a little bit. Execution Sentence, obviously very recently, was just redesigned. Final Reckoning, brand new, has been added. Seraphim is now part of your toolkit. That used to be kind of a prot-only thing. Healing Hands has had a bit of redesign. Empyrean Power, slightly reiterated from an Azerite trait, if I'm not mistaken, and re-added. Probably missing a few, Bolas, so why don't you talk to me about talents here?
Sure. So the big change is that a lot of our talents that were talents in BFA are now baselines. So stuff like Consecration, Awake of Ashes, and Hammer of Wrath, that were all talents that we had to pick. And quite often there's sort of make a row sort of useless as far for Wake, because you'd always take Wake in every situation. So the other two talents were just sitting around doing nothing. So stuff like Divine Judgments has gone away, and we never took it anyway. It's no big loss. But we've got stuff like the new cross Pally Spec row with Divine Purpose, Seraphim, and Holy Avenger. And those are all pretty reasonable options. I could see us taking any of them over the course of an expansion, just in different, circumstance situations. So those are all pretty good changes. Stuff that we've got recently, the execution centers change. It's a lot more like what old execution centers used to be like, where it was a 1-minute cooldown and would do a large burst of damage, rather than what the BFA design was like, where it was just sort of more like a holy power buff for 10 seconds, but the actual initial damage was not really much more than a Templar's Verdict. Outside of that, the Final Reckoning is another pretty more of the more recent ones, just happened last week. So it's hard to really say exactly how powerful it's going to be, but it looks really strong, at least initially, when you have multiple 1 minute or 45-second cooldowns. You can sort of line up and delay for each other and just do a whole bunch of burst damage at once. For the Azerite traits that got turned into talents, I feel like they just kind of tried to take the most popular ones from BFA and just, wrap them up and give them to us again, but they didn't really understand exactly what made them good for us or like why we wanted them. Like Light's Decree turning into Sanctified Wrath. It's good in AoE, but like it was really good when you could combine it with Crusade and just have both of them, and they're on the same talent row now, so you can't take both. You have to pick either I'm taking Crusade or I'm taking Sanctified Wrath for the AoE damage. You can't. It's just like a weird, pick between them rather than the ability to take both. And with Imperium Power, they redesigned it so instead of just being like a proc per minute on any ability, it only procs on Crusader Strike, and it's 15% chance, I think. And it basically just never procs. Like, you press Crusader Strike so infrequently, especially during cooldowns, that you just very rarely actually get a proc that's going to be useful. Whereas previously, you just proc all the time. You could just like have a bunch of extra Divine Storms. It was great, even on a single target. And now it just, I'm pretty sure the Holy Power generation, even on AoE of Blade of Wrath, is just going to be better almost all the time.
So, I mean, do you like at what point is, because talents are meant to be competitive, right? In terms of choice, like you're meant to, quote unquote, have that meaningful choice and tough design. Like, where do you draw the line between it sucks now that I have to choose between these things? Like, where is it that I just greedily want all of them versus you think it's just poorly designed that you have to choose between like Crusade, Sanctified?
I think they just didn't consider it. Either that or they want us to pick between them. They don't want us to have both, which it might be fine. But then I also think it might just be we take Final Reckoning and don't take either of them because neither of them are that strong without the other one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Do you like the way the talents were added and changed, or like the direction they headed in MB? What do you think?
So I actually am a big fan of like how the 15 row works now, the level 50 row, the level 40 row. Like, there's some stuff that I'd like to change, right? Like, I feel like there's definitely like a tuning pass that needs to be done between like the level 50 row and maybe like a cooldown change to Holy Avenger or some type of change to Holy Avenger. Just take it away from a 3-minute CD. But I think for the most part, like, they've done pretty good on those rows, I'd say, in terms of like making them competitive rows or seeing like which ones can be useful for specific fights and stuff like that. Where I think they pretty much dropped the ball is like the level 25 row. I think EP has no business being on that row. Like, EP's proc chance is like abysmal for like what it does to your rotation because it puts Crusader Strike on high priority, which is fine. Like, promoting a different type of playstyle is definitely fine, but it feels like you gain no reward for it. Like, its proc rate feels so bad. Mm-hmm. It just feels like you're fishing for a free Divine Storm proc, and the fact that Crusader Strike does like abysmal damage compared to like other builders, it definitely doesn't work out well. Fires of Justice was pretty useless last expansion, and I think it's pretty useless now. And I'm pretty sure like the only de facto option now is like Blade of Wrath, especially since there's a Conduit that like directly benefits Blade of Wrath. Like, I don't know. I think that's definitely where like an area that needs massive work. I guess for like non-damage rows, I still think it's pretty sad to see that Cavalier's on a row with 2 defensive options. And I'm also still pretty sad to see that Justicar's Vengeance still exists as a talent, even though we've gone 2 expansions now and no one's ever going to take it for anything. The change they did to Healing Hands was really, really good. I'm a big fan of it, but I just wish it hit more targets. Like, it felt really good to be able to bring like some small raid utility and massive like group utility with the Word of Glory, and now it's sort of just like a single target Holy Power spender, which is like not great.
Amongst all the like constant class buffs and changes throughout the alpha and beta, Word of Glory has been stealth buffed over and over and over in terms of spell power scaling. And now with this on top of it, like I said, even in just kind of the basic Ret gameplay that I did in a dungeon a few dungeons a couple days ago, Word of Glory is kind of insane. Like it like lay on hand crits people and stuff. So it's pretty nice support there, at least. But yeah, it sucks that doesn't cleave, I suppose.
Yeah, well, okay. Like, the thing is, I understand that it does a lot of healing. It definitely does. Like, the fact that it can do like 60-70% of a person's HP non-crit is like crazy. I just like the aspect that it was like a cleave heal, right? Like it was a multi-target heal. So to some extent, I feel like I'd be more willing to like give up the fact that it's a stronger single target heal just to have like that old playstyle back, or like the old way it worked.
Okay. Ren, what do you think about the talents?
So I don't know. I think if they did something with Fires of Justice, like it could be good. Like who doesn't want your spenders to cost less? You know, Blade of Wrath, it could have been taken less because we don't have expurgation anymore. But you know, like Envy said, like they gave us a conduit that's going to buff it. So is that just going to be the default because Fires of Justice and Empyrean Power are just like not good enough? I don't know. And it kind of sucks to see because all of them could potentially be cool, you know. The Paladin row with Holy Avenger and Seraphim. Again, I think that's a good row. I think we'll use all three of them. So I don't know. I don't really have much to add that we haven't talked about, really. There's a lot of potential, but it feels like there needs to be some polish there if they want us to use a lot of these talents, you know.
How do you guys feel about kind of having a bunch of talents now that enforce maybe, like, I don't know if quicker is really the right word here, but at least more frequent access to powerful CDs rather than just outside of wings, right? Like you can cake on, you got Seraphim, you got baseline Ashes, Execution Sentence, now single target, Final Reckoning on 1 minute. Do you think that it helps sustain, or do you think it just kind of hurts the niche that maybe you're going towards, which is burst? Like do you view this like as a I can't see it any other way than positive in my opinion, but like I just don't know it as well as you.
I like it because when all of those things do line up, you're going to do like a crazy insane burst. And if there are multiple windows where you need to do damage to something, you know, you're not just stuck with every 2-minute burst, you know. And I think that's always a good thing. And I don't know that we have to have smooth damage all the time, but definitely having Final Reckoning like on a 1 minute, Execution Sentence on a 1 minute, that makes it, you know, so we might have, it might be a small window, but we can do kind of a huge amount of damage on like a priority target and not just be, you know, holding our wings and getting less casts in because we, you know, on progression, you need to get that burst in. So I definitely think it's good. And then so not only does it give us more small burst windows, but it also makes it so when we line all those things up, we potentially do like an insane amount of damage during that window.
Mb, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely like having like because it definitely smooths things out, right? I mentioned before that Rep Prior was like, you know, like all your damage feels like it comes from your wings window, and it sort of feels like you could just AFK the rest of the time in between. Obviously, you don't want to do that; like that's a big damage loss. But that's sort of the way it feels, right? Like spells you cast inside wings feel a lot, you know, better than they do when you're casting them outside of wings. So having like stuff that's on a 1 minute CD to sort of make it feel a lot more smoother I'm definitely a big fan of it, because then you sort of get to see like, oh, every minute like a couple of my divine storms or a couple of my Templars verdicts are going to hit harder. I get this big burst of damage through Execution Sentence. I like it a lot. I think it was a positive change, and it kind of gives you like a play style of like planning ahead for your burst. And you know, like if you play well around those windows, then obviously you get the damage that pays off.
All right, Bolas, anything to add to that?
I feel like it doesn't smooth that much because you really, like when you hold, you know, Wake and Seraphim and, you know, Execution Sentence and Final Reckoning all for the same, you know, 8-second window, you're still doing burst damage. But having it on a 1 minute burst window rather than, you know, every 2 minutes, I think is a lot better. So yeah, I'm cool with it. I think it's a good change. I hope that it's going to be good.
What are your, just because I know my thoughts, but it doesn't matter right now. What are your thoughts on current iteration of Holy Avenger being a 3-minute cooldown? They tried to sweeten the deal a bit recently by making it automatically apply 3 holy power, but it's still a 3-minute cooldown in a world of 1 and 2 minute cooldowns, especially for Ret. What do you guys think?
Well, me and MB, I think, are both going to have a whole lot worse to say. So if he wants to go first, he can go ahead.
So my big brain tinfoil is thinking that at some point Blizzard's gonna make Wings back to a 1 minute 30-second CD, in which case Holy Avenger will be sick because every other Wings it'll line up, which is cool. But if they don't do that, which they probably won't, it's kind of like it kind of feels bad, like because it's not even a 4 minute CD, so it just comes up at 3 minutes and you're just gonna hold it for Wings anyway, unless there's a scenario where you'd like want to use it with like your final verdict and execution sentence just so you could fit in the last one before like the boss dies, but I don't think that's like the ideal scenario, right? So I don't know, I'm not a fan of it. I wish it would go down to 2 minutes and take some type of hit, whether it's like through duration, loss of the holy power game. I'm not a fan.
It used to be 2 minutes once upon a time, right? Like, when did they change that?
Yeah, it was 2 minutes back when it was a talent. But I think probably like back in like MOP or WAD.
It would have been in WAD.
Yeah. And then I think it's a minute and a half for Holy now. Like on live. I think it's a minute and a half. So it's just weird that Blizzard splits up our cooldowns in such a way that we have 45-second cooldowns, right? So they line up at 45, minute and a half. 2:15 and then 3 minutes. And then we have 1 minute CDs now, with execution sentence, final reckoning, and then those line up with Wings and stuff like that. I wish they'd make it a lot more uniform. So perhaps do something like buff Seraphim in terms of like, duration and stats provided. Make it a 1 minute CD. Maybe like buff Wake and making it like a 30-second cooldown or something like that. So that way we fall into this line of like you have a 30-second, a 1 minute, a bunch of 1 minutes, and then a big 2 minute. Whereas right now it's sort of split. Like we have a 3 minute, 45. Well, we have two 45s with Seraphim, and then we have like 2 1 minutes with Execution Sentence and Final Reckoning. I think it's just a big mess. I think they need to like consolidate how the cooldowns work for Retribution.
Okay, Bolas, what do you think? Since Ren mentioned that you want to get a word in on or two or about Holy Avenger.
Oh no, I think it was MB who wanted to rant about it.
Oh, okay.
I feel pretty neutral about Holy Avenger. It's cool. I don't know, like it doesn't feel like it has a huge amount of impact on your Final Reckoning and Execution Centers burst windows, mostly because you're probably going to be able to fit in comfortably 2 finishes and really going to struggle to fit in 3 into your Execution Centers window either way. So it's probably going to kind of be whatever. And as to the point about cooldowns lining up, I think the most likely thing is if we end up taking the whole 1 minute thing, is you're just going to delay Seraphim and Wake for your 1 minute stuff anyway. And so yeah, having them on a 1 minute cooldown or 30-second for Wake instead would feel a lot better, so you wouldn't feel like you're sort of like losing out cooldowns on these abilities by having to hold them 15 seconds every minute.
Brendan, do you want to add anything to that? Or are you just kind of whatever about Holy Avenger?
Well, I think a lot of the problems that they were talking about are not necessarily like a problem with Holy Avenger. Like you're talking about holding it for a minute, but maybe you hold Wings for a minute, or maybe you're on a fight where you want that extra burst window. I think the 3 minutes is fine. You're talking about a 6 minute fight. You're getting in 3 Wings and 2 Holy Avengers. That means you have a little bit of room to play around with them. If you want to line them all up, you can do so. Sure, it feels bad to hold one of them, but maybe it plays to the fight. And I think a talent that works on every single fight in every situation is not necessarily a great talent. I'm sure if the only one that's available in that row, then that also feels bad. But I think that Holy Avenger being on a 3 minute cooldown and being versatile like that also opens up a window for Seraphim to be used. And I think that's good. I think it's better for the spec than just throwing it on a 2 minute cooldown. If you throw it on a 2 minute cooldown, then why not just make it so the first 10 seconds or whatever of your Wings you generate 3 times holy power? Why would it be another button? If it's on 2 minutes, then why would you give us another keybind? Which I'm fine with. I'm fine with less keybinds, but
and more
I
GCs.
don't really see.
Please, less keybinds.
Yes.
Yeah.
At this point, my poor tiny little hands, like I just want less keybinds. But yeah, I think I know my opinion is unpopular. I think once people start playing it, it'll be less of an issue. but I like it. I think it makes it so you're going to have to think about your cooldowns, and you're going to have to, the point of offensive cooldowns has always been, how can I maximize these to help my group? How many casts can I get in, and am I getting all those casts in? And, obviously, you have to plan around that. And I think the 3-minute cooldown makes you have to do that. I do agree that having anything on a 45-second cooldown kind of, I don't really like it, because you do end up with Wake, you end up just sitting on it for a while, which you do on live right now, but for different reasons. So I don't know.
All right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of mix match that you have to do with having 45-second, 1 minute, 2 minute, and 3 minute. I can't help but feel that that's done on purpose.
Yep.
I almost want to
so.
say innocently, with the thought that you have different tools for different situations, whereas we as fellow PvE players want to obviously just line up everything perfectly every time and just, nuke. So that's probably the goal they're going for. But to have so many CDs and so many different buckets is... I don't really know a lot of classes that have that, like Ret does. They exist, obviously, just not as many to this extent. So it's kind of nuts, I suppose, in that regard. Is there anything on this talent tree, in your guys' opinion, with the preamble, obviously, that usually, obviously, everybody wants their own, baseline things to the class and important things. But in terms of generic scope of the core class, is there anything in this talent tree that you think definitely belongs baseline? Or an ability, as you mentioned, for instance, Justicar's Vengeance, that needs to be just completely axed, redesigned? Anything like that stand out to you, MB?
In terms of stuff that should probably go baseline, Imperium Power is one of them. Like, bring back the old Azerite talent, instead of making it proc exclusively off Crusader Strike, and make that baseline. I was actually kind of surprised it didn't go baseline. Grand Crusader existed for, like, forever. At least from when I played the class, like, in MoP and WoD, like, Grand Crusader was just a passive proc that gave you free Divine Storms, and I don't see why it shouldn't be passive now. It's like a small DPS increase on single target, and it feels like nice to get like a free proc like that when you're AoEing. I know a lot of people probably say Divine Purpose. Realistically, Divine Purpose or Imperium Power doesn't matter to me. Other things that should probably go baseline. Cavalier. I think 2-horse minimum baseline would be great. And making that talent tree, the 35 row, like exclusively based around like defensive options would be amazing, right? Like you could choose between reduced CD bubble, maybe replace Cavalier with something like Divine Protection, which is like magic % DR, and then leave eye for an eye. Other than that, I think it's fine that everything else is a talent. I can't imagine like anything else.
Okay, so not too bad left. What do you think, Rin?
I don't even know if I don't know if they need to be baseline, but it sure would be nice. Like, I don't know if we're going to get a mobility buff. I don't know that Cavalier is the answer. It does confuse me that it exists at all. I mean, if their easy fix to our mobility is to give us Cavalier baseline, sure, but I don't know if that's going to save us at all. I also think Justicar's Vengeance doesn't necessarily need to be like axed or reworked. Like, just take the holy power cost down. So, like, new players don't look at it and say, oh, this costs more holy power, it must do more damage. I think everyone's going to kind of have dead talents, unfortunately. It's just, I don't know that they have enough manpower to go in for every single spec and get rid of stuff like Justicar's Vengeance,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That doesn't mean, you can't give feedback and
Oh,
advice,
yeah,
or at
totally,
least in the direction
totally.
you want it to go, whether it goes that way or not.
Yeah.
Bolas, what do you
Yeah.
think? Anything stand out to you in the tree should be baseline, dead talent, etc.?
I could see maybe Imperium Power baseline, but I think it's also fine to have it as a talent. I think the main issue with it is just how it's got redesigned rather than it being a talent or not being a talent. Cavalier, I would rather have his baseline as not, just because Ret's mobility is so poor. Like, if anything, I would just want to see more mobility options on the talent tree, whether that's giving stuff to compete with Cavalier or making it baseline and then giving us other options as well to take versus the defensive stuff, or just like an entirely new mobility row, just because that's definitely an issue Ret's had for a long time. Other than that, they did a pretty good job as far as giving us most of the stuff that we wanted baseline at the beginning of Shadowlands, with like, you know, Hammer of Wrath and Wake of Ashes, like the stuff that would take in every situation being baseline. So I'm pretty happy with stuff in that regard.
So overall, generally speaking, positive changes to the talent tree moving in SL, looks like.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna throw this out as a mobility suggestion, and I want to hear what you guys think, especially if you've ever played like Diablo 3, where you throw your sword at an area and like a second later, holy blink down on it and AoE.
Yeah, but that existed at some point. It was a beta talent in Legion for us, and then they ended up axing it for no reason.
My God, those monsters.
Yeah. It's kind of depressing. That would have been a cool ability.
Somebody else had the same idea.
But it wasn't their designer, was it?
Nope.
Unlucky.
No. I don't know. For some reason, I don't know the logic behind why our mobility is just not great.
I'm not really sure either, because like from a theme perspective, like DKs, right? DKs are the other class that, you know, we joke about with mobility and stuff, which is better than yours at this point, by the way, with Death's Advance, and they can get Wraithwalk, etc. But the DK concept is that they're meant to be an immovable force, right? That's why Death's Advance works the way it does. That's why they have a Death Grip, bring enemies to you rather than you get to enemies. So I'm not really sure what the Ret, because lore and like immersion and class fantasy and stuff is something that's super important to Blizzard. So I'm not really sure what the logical reasoning is behind Ret being so poor in mobility, like what you get as a result of that. But
no, either, because it seems like we should be the ones who are, you know, like leading the charge, right? And it doesn't really feel like that. Like, why would a warrior of the light be lagging behind the rest of their group, right?
Well, you can lead the charge for 3 seconds at a time on GCD on your horse, and then that's about it, and then everyone runs past you. But yeah, I don't know. That is a weird one. I don't know. Usually I try to have some kind of insight, at least from what I know. But you guys are stumped on that one as well. I'm not really sure, and I assume obviously that kind of feedback's been given a ton to them, right, about the mobility issue.
Yes, every opportunity.
I don't know. That's
I don't know either, and I haven't even heard anything through like the grapevine on what their logic is, you know.
Yeah, well, that's a toughie. Let's dive a bit deeper into Shadowlands stuff, though. Let's talk about covenants, everyone's favorite topic. I'll be that guy, like I like to say. I'll be the Twitch chat member here for a sec. What's the best covenant for Ret? Now, jokes aside for a sec, obviously numbers are going to change. A lot's going to change in that regard. But mechanically speaking, right, just the Covenant abilities, what we're looking at right now. We'll get to Conduit, Soulbinds, Legendaries, etc. a bit later. But just based on the Conduit class ability, Divine Toll and whatnot, where do you guys see as the good choice or choices coming into SL for Ret Paladins? MB, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So if you're a key guy, if you're an M+er, you probably are going to go Divine Toll. I can't see you playing any other option. It lines up with all your other 1-minute burst options. You're pretty much going to have it for every pack. It gives good holy power and a pretty decent buff for your first Divine Storm, like after getting all that holy power. So if you're a key guy, that might be your go-to choice. In PvE content, to me right now, it's pretty much a toss-up between Ashen Hollow and Vanquisher's Hammer. I think both of those abilities are like pretty good now after the changes. I think Ashen Hall is still horrible because it's a 4-minute CD and a 30-second duration. But Vanquisher's Hammer hits really hard, and with its Conduit buffing its damage up to like 250% at max rank. Like, I know it costs 1 holy power, and it feels kind of weird that you can have 4 holy power just to have like that empowered finisher. But Vanquisher's Hammer, like fully maxed out rank Conduit, does like 2.5 times the damage of a regular Templar's Verdict at 1 holy power cost, and plus it buffs your next Divine Storm. Like, I don't know. I think it's pretty good the way it is right now. Maybe it's some quality of life improvements, but otherwise it's pretty solid. Night Fae got killed. It's pretty sad to see, you know, that Covenant choice got murdered. They nerfed the cooldown on it. They nerfed summer, or not summer. They nerfed autumn.
Autumn, yeah.
I don't see a reason to take that Covenant anymore, unless summer is like actually does insane damage. And it also feels horrible to play with now. especially like the fact that you can't line up Autumn with wings. Like, I don't know. They butchered it. They killed my son. And I don't know what else to say. They massacred my boy.
Ren, what do you think about the Covenants?
Before I forget, I think that you shouldn't have to rely on having full rank Conduit for an ability to be good. Is Vanquisher's Hammer unredeemable? No. But also, if you're picking Necrolords, you're losing mobility, which goes back to what we were just talking about. I think the mobility that you get from Night Fae and Venthyr will be like a huge factor in what Covenant we pick, regardless of your situation. Otherwise, like, what Ret Paladin doesn't want more mobility. I'm not gonna lie, Ashen Hollow like can feel pretty bad, but at the same time, like, I personally not a huge fan, so I don't want to be casting it more often than 4 minutes either. So I don't know, we're gonna have to see. I do think that at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to numbers and are you willing to sacrifice mobility, or are you gonna go for the mobility? Because for me, that's like a huge factor.
Okay, the mobility, but I mean, yeah, okay, for sure. Night Fae and Venthyr definitely give more mobility than the other options, but
Venthyr is also tuned really well right now, and I do think Blessings potentially will still be good.
For Night Fae,
I would have rather, sorry. I do wish that they kept it a 30-second cooldown and made it self-buff only. They could have like nerfed it that way or prevented things from getting out again that way. It would have felt better, and I'm not really sure how things are going to work out now with it.
Okay. Bolas, what do you think?
Yeah, like if you'd asked us last week, what Covenant, it would have probably been Night Fae hands down, but with the Autumn nerf and then the Legendary Badge, that nerf, it's kind of hard to say. I'm a lot less hyped on Vanquisher's Hammer as well than MB is. Like, it definitely could be strong, especially the further we go into the expansion with the more ranks of the Conduits coming out. But with the 1 minute stuff, yeah, it's hard to say exactly what's going to line up well and what's going to actually end up being good at this rate. Like, we'll probably have a better answer in a couple of weeks, but with changes like a couple of days ago, but tough to say. I do really like the Ashen Hollow changes as well, though. Like the making it an actual AoE thing, and then also buffing the Hammer Breath damage is both really, really good changes that fix two of the biggest issues that I think that the spell used to have.
But that 4 minute CD, man.
It's a 4 minute CD, yeah.
But
it's also a cast, and who wants to be, I don't know. I personally don't want to use it more often than that because I don't like using it.
Fair. I think it also, just make it not have a cast.
Mm-hmm.
Stellar idea.
Yeah.
For largely melee based class, and I mean I include Holy in that, right? Like Holy's usually in the brunt of the action in melee range anyway, so it just feels weird to. But like Ret and Prot especially, like it just feels weird to have to stop your spam for 1.5 seconds and throw an Ashen Hallow down. But remember, keep in mind again, we're talking from a mechanical perspective, right? I mean, it could be the week before launch, and all of a sudden they numerically buff Vanquisher's Hammer a huge amount, and then all of a sudden Vanquisher's Hammer's an abyss. It's really more just mechanically, like, what do you see as some of the best options for PvE content? If you want to lend a note on PvP, go for it. That's certainly not my expertise, but it's just how things are approached and where you see the advantages lie within the PvE content coming out for Shadowlands. Diving a bit deeper on this, let's talk about conduits and soulbinds. We don't have to go too crazy on the soulbinds. We usually don't, just because soulbinds are constantly being kind of changed and redesigned. Obviously, if you want to mention anything specifically, feel free to. But conduits are definitely something that I want to spearhead with you guys, particularly potency. If there's anything you want to mention from, like, endurance or finesse, like the defense over the support conduits, definitely mention it. If there's anything noteworthy for Ret, but it's really the potency ones and how you guys feel about them, MB.
Okay, so I don't like any of the potency conduits. I guess I'll just start it off with that. The Light's Reach one is probably the best one out of all of them. I think that's probably like the de facto that you'll probably take. Like, as for other potency ones, like I said, the Vanquisher's Hammer potency one is really good. I think the Long Summer is also probably good if we end up playing Night Fae. Hollow Discernment, I think, needs to be changed because I don't think they planned, making a small rework to Ashen Hollow and changing this Conduit. I think Reading Clarity is kind of useless because overlapping Judgment debuffs on the same 5 mobs that's going to hit is like not great, and the damage benefit is like I don't think it's that impactful to where it matters for me. Virtuous Command is actually pretty good. I wish the only thing that they would change about Virtuous Command was that it affected Divine Storm. I think the fact that almost none of our conduits benefit AoE damage is like, it's kind of like sad. Like they don't buff Divine Storm for any reason. Yet you see Windwalkers that have like a flat 20% buff conduit for Fist of Fury, and I think they have another one for Spinning Crane Kick. Yeah, I mean they do need it, but it'd be nice to see.
Don't take this from them.
Yeah, Truth's Wake is actually an AoE one, right? Because it does burn damage to all your targets, but considering its secondary target like fall off, like I don't even think at max rank it would be that good. I think on your primary target it'd probably hit pretty hard because Wake hits like in terms of like single target damage, it does a pretty good amount of damage. But yeah, otherwise like I don't know. Templar's Vindication, not great. Like I said, Truth's Wake doesn't sound that great. Light's Reach, Virtuous Command, and like the Blessing of Summer one and the Righteous Might one are probably the go-tos. For Finesse, I actually think we have some pretty good like Finesse conduits. The one that increases Divine Speed or Divine Steed's duration at max rank makes it like a 6-second duration, I think, right? Like a 6-second 100% speed boost is like pretty comparable to like Sprint being 8 seconds of 70% or something like that.
Yeah, but Sprint's off the GCD.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I mean, listen, I don't make up the GCD rules at Blizzard. Like, I don't think Horse should be on the GCD at all. Like, literally zero reason for it to exist. We also have another Finesse one, I believe. If only I could remember the name. It's it's Echoing Blessings.
Mm-hmm.
Echoing Blessings at max rank, I think, could be really crazy, because the one that makes it so when Bop and Blessing of Sacrifice ends, it puts a DR on your target for 8 seconds. Blessing of Sacrifice is already a 12-second 30% DR, right? So you pretty much, after that duration, you stop transferring the damage, and they just get a flat 30% DR, is like pretty nice. And the freedom buff, because you can actually just apply freedom to yourself and spell cancel it, so you can just literally macro it to automatically cancel, and you just gain like a flat 30% movement speed for 8 seconds. So I think those two conduits are doing pretty nice. I don't know about the rest personally. I haven't played around with them much. Maybe Stalwart as a Crusader could be abused for fighting Warlocks. I know Warlocks have been like a sort of a bane in PvP this last season. So, maybe if they're a meta class, which they likely will be, it might be a pretty good aura to sit in terms of like reducing fear duration.
Okay. Just for those maybe listening and not watching, especially when this goes to YouTube later, I just really quickly want to read out the 4 potency conduits, just so we're on the same page here for Ret. So there's Light's Reach, which is Blade of Justice. Blade of Justice's range is increased by 2 yards and deals 20% at max rank, 50% more damage. There is Templar's Verdict, has a 15% chance to strike again for 6% of its damage, ranking up to 30% chance. There's Wake of Ashes, burns the target for an additional 10% over 6 seconds, up to 25% at max rank. And finally, Virtuous Command, Judgment grants you Seal of Command for 4 seconds, granting your Templar's Verdict, Crusader Strike, Blade of Justice, and Weapon Attack a 20% chance of dealing 10% up to 25% additional holy damage. Just so we're on the same page while we talk about these. But Ren, what do you think about your guys' conduit situation across the board for Ret right now? Anything stand out to you?
Kind of depends, like, what is their definition of potency? Like, how much are these supposed to give us? Because some of them don't really, we shouldn't be thinking about what is this conduit going to give us at full rank, because when are we going to have the full rank of it, None of them are particularly fun mechanically, so I have trouble thinking outside of, like, what is going to do the most damage, because they're just kind of boring. I don't really have anything else to say about them that MB hasn't, because, I don't know, they're boring. Some of the finesse and endurance ones are, like, potentially fun, but, like, how many of those do you get to use? It depends on what Soulbind you pick, right? Like, I think Naya on Night Fae has one finesse down the tree that we go, like, cool. So we have these potentially, like, cool utility things that we might not really get to use.
Amongst the kind of specs that we've talked to so far and deep diving these conduits a bit more, Ret does have, as MB mentioned, some really good finesse ones that I don't want to say in any way fix, but certainly help the whole utility thing a bit. They're fairly desirable. But what I've noticed as you guys were talking about these is, I mean, you're kind of right. Your potency conduits are a bit boring. They're all pretty much just flat percentage damage, or like there's no procs to handle. There's nothing really.
They're really boring. There's no mini games you have to play to like maximize the usage.
Virtuous a bit, maybe,
nothing.
right? Like maybe a bit virtuous because you have to predict you have to plan ahead for your 4-second window so you can unload as much during that and hope that it procs. But what are your thoughts, Bolas?
I mean, even at max ranks, it's only 10% chance to do 25% extra damage, right? That's like a 2.5% on average increase to whatever ability you're using.
Right.
That's not worth playing around. Like, you're going to gain more by just doing your rotation optimally than you are by trying to get 2.5% extra damage on whatever finish you're using within the 4-second window. They're just really uninspired, just all flat damage increases. I wish they'd put a lot more thought into designing them. Even the Covenant specific ones, they're basically all the same. Like, Summer is probably the most interesting one, where it's like extends the duration of the buff rather than just increasing the damage like portion that it gives you. But yeah, they probably should have spent some more design time on the conduits.
And it would be fine, except for like that's kind of the story for a lot of things for Ret. Like, I wouldn't be upset about the conduits. I'm not really, because there's not whatever. But it does feel like a lot of things are like, it increases my damage, it exists, and that's like the best thing I can say about it.
But the other thing is, like, they're not even giving you a large damage bonus. Like, the potency conduits that we get are so tiny in the amount of damage they actually give you. Like, 15% chance on TV to give you like an extra one for 6% of damage is so small. That's like you're better off just almost every situation taking the Soulbind that will give you the better passive Soulbind traits than the Spec specific ones, because they give you just so little damage increase.
Yeah, I'd like to see what target number I guess they're going for. Like, how much are these supposed to affect our DPS? Collectively, we're supposed to get like 5% damage from all 3 potency conduits. Then sure, maybe they've hit their mark, but I don't know. Depends on what they want from it, right?
I'd be surprised if we even got 5%.
Yeah.
Is there anything notable for you guys in the Soulbinds themselves? Like, is there a particular Soulbind that it's like you just can't, like, this is cookie cutter bis for Ret, there's no other way kind of thing?
I don't think any of them are like crazy standout. A lot of them are just like, oh, when you use your ability, like, you get a damage buff,
Yeah, I think Naja actually has a pretty good Soulbind. Even though it goes into, she has one Soulbind that falls into an endurance conduit. But God, which one is it?
Dauntless Duelist.
It's the one that gives you 4% flat damage on like your target.
Yeah,
that's the
that
one.
like that seems really good, and especially considering like I don't think there's like very many conduits for Ret in terms of like a potency slot that like gives us a flat 4% damage increase. Like, maybe that'll be worth taking. I don't really know about the rest of them.
Slots.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really know about the rest of them, so I can't really say on it. But that was one of them that was pointed out to me, and it looks pretty good.
That stood out. All right. Bolas, anything in the Soulbind world that you think is important?
Not especially off the top of my head. Just you'd probably rather take any of them than any of the potency conduits that we have available.
So, is, in your guys' opinion, then, for instance, you guys just mentioned Naja, and her Thrill Seeker is not very bad either, by the way. I would think, at least for Red. I know for Prod it's pretty nice. Is having her as a Soulbind worth taking Ashen Hallow? You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to having, like you mentioned, for M+ goers, maybe Kyrian or Vanquisher's Hammer, since you like that a lot, MB. Like, you know, you got to have that trade-off at some point, right? So where's the net benefit lie?
So here's the thing, right? Ashen Hollow sucks to use. It's like, it feels horrible as a cast time, 4-minute CD, 30-second grounded duration. It's also like a huge pool. Like you could literally just pull random stuff with it if you're not smart with how you put it down. Oh, really?
They changed it.
So I guess I just made that up. I completely lied about that one. But you know, it's not great to play with, but its damage profile's like pretty decent, right? Like I was messing around in M plus with it last night. I did like 5 or 6 keys with it, and when you use it, you definitely feel the impact of it. But 4-minute CDs feel horrible, like, because in that downtime of 4 minutes, like, you know, like, what are you doing? You're doing practically nothing without it, right? Like, obviously you still have your wings, but like, you notice a significant difference in impact when you're using it and you're not using it. So there might be scenarios in PvE where you would use it, right? Because over the course of a fight, I think it's better for that type of stuff. And the fact that you get the Venthyr teleport, which I think is like really good. Like, I don't think it would be that bad to give up getting a Conduit like that, but I'm not sure. It still has to be tuned.
What do you guys think, Bolas, Ren?
I think, yeah, I don't think Ashen Hollow is that bad. Like, you're not that disappointed if you have to go Venthyr for, you know, Soulbinds and stuff, especially because, you know, like Amy mentioned, the teleport's really good. I think, yeah, it's the main issues with Ashen Hollow are design based, like how it functions, rather than how much damage it does. Like, it still does a lot of damage. It's just every 4 minutes, and if the boss gets dragged out of your big pool, then you feel really, really bad.
Yeah, you don't really get another opportunity.
Ashen Hollow has some pretty decent raid support as well, for what it's worth now, since it's AoE.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mini healing raid CD, which is
yeah, the changes last week fixed like a lot of the issues with it, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely worth noting, you know, like it's something important to consider. But then on the flip side, you know, they just indirectly, well, not indirectly, but directly buffed Kyrian, right, by making their Kyrian pot off CD of regular pot. So now Kyrian has 3 pots, and then Kyrian also gets rid of bleeds, which we know are rampant in Nathria. Do you think that the Ret toolkit, speaking of Nathria, you guys mentioned it earlier, do you think, because one of the things you guys mentioned is a lot of fights just don't really pertain to Ret's kind of toolkit. Do you think that Nathria is kind of in the direction of Ret's toolkit? A lot of bleeds, a lot of good uses for immunities and bop. Kyrian pot on top of it. Should you go Kyrian? What do you guys think of that? Does it play to their strengths a bit?
Definitely. I think if you can abuse bubble and bop, it's definitely going to be a good tier for us, because we bring both of those abilities, right? I think Sack can be pretty decent in a lot of scenarios. I think I'm just more interested to see how it happens in the next tier, right? Assuming that we don't have like a vampire themed raid where everybody's got bleed damage, you know, like I'm more interested to see like how we hold up moving like past this tier, right? Going into tiers where bop may not be as useful, or like there may not be a fight where you can abuse immunities like a N'Zoth or like an Argus or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but to be fair, we just got done saying, like, if we have a tier to relieve Shine, then maybe the community won't think so poorly of us anymore.
I think there's also a damage thing than just like the utility being useful in situations, though, because there's been tiers where Bop was really good. Like Bod Bop had like a bunch of applications on like opulence and using it on yourself on stuff like Megatalk. Like, so yeah, I think it's a damage thing just as much as a utility being a good thing.
Yeah, at some point you have to decide whether or not the trade-off is worth it, right? I think a good example of that would probably be looking at prop paladins, albeit this isn't like how damage output, this is more so like how tanky the class is. Like, I feel like you could have abused a lot of stuff. I feel like you could have abused a lot of stuff with spell warding, especially in BOD. Was a good example of that, but you know, like prop paladins kind of get rolled over. So at what point do you want to take like that trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Okay, I was just curious about a side note. Okay, so Soulbind's Conduit's done. Let's talk about legendaries. And you guys have definitely made a few notes here. Just like everybody else, you have, let me see here, Paladin, there we go. You have your 4 baseline legendaries, 4 class legendaries, and, of course, the neutrals. We don't need to get into the neutrals. We're talking specifically about Ret stuff here. Anything stand out to you, Bolas, for the Ret legendaries? Oh, that's a tongue twister in there.
Yeah, so Badge of the Mad Paragon used to be really, really strong. Like when they first put it in, it would extend wings by 3 seconds for each Hammer of Wrath you cast in it, which is really busted. They've nerfed it twice since then, so it's like 1 second extension now, and it might be okay, but it's probably not going to be super great anymore. It's just, I think they really didn't want us to have super, super long wings duration, which is fair enough. It was kind of busted before. Outside of that, Final Verdict is a pretty cool legendary for us. It gives us more Hammer Wrath casts, but also it gives us sort of like a weird semi-ranged playstyle where you're not doing 100% of your damage output when you're like not in melee range, but you can use most of your abilities like Blade of Justice, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, Templar's Verdict, or Final Verdict. Wake of Ashes will all hit in like a 10-yard range, so you can kind of stand out of melee a little bit and do like a bad Outlaw Rogue impression, even if your Crusader Strikes and melees won't hit. So that's kind of like a cool legendary. Other ones than that, the Divine Storm one is I'm not super convinced that it was a great pick. Like, it's really, really buggy for one, and that a lot of the time it doesn't project properly, or it doesn't increase its damage, or it doesn't do damage. It just has a lot of issues that I think they probably need to fix and put a lot of work into making it actually functional before it launches. But even then, there's probably very few fights.
In Legion too.
Yeah, it'd pull like through walls all the time. But there's also very few fights, at least in Raid, where you'd probably want just a legendary that only buffs Divine Storm. In Mythic Plus, it's obviously going to be a lot better. But the other Ret specific one is Relentless Inquisitor, I think.
Yep.
Which is... I don't know why they decided to make that... Yeah? Oh, you said you question?
Oh, yeah, I have questions. I'm agreeing with what you're about to say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know why they decided to make that a legendary, because it was an Azerite trait in BFA, but it wasn't a particularly good one. And it wasn't like one we took, in every situation or wanted to stack it or anything like that. It was like, if sometimes you just have to take it as your 6th Azerite trait because you got nothing else to pick that was decent. So, I guess I'll take Relentless Inquisitor. It's not the end of the world. But, like, it's not like an iconic ability that was beloved or anything. It's kind of just felt like we need a 4th legendary power for Ret. Just chuck an Azerite ability on there. It'll be good. And it doesn't... Yeah, they nerfed the haste that it gives as well. So I'm really skeptical that it'll actually end up being powerful.
I'm confused.
Yeah. It was definitely a weird pick. Not one that I would expected for them to give us. For the generic Pally ones, the Judgment one is probably okay. I'm not a big fan of having your holy power gains be inconsistent. So like you're not really 100% sure about how much holy power you're actually going to gain from each button press, or effectively gain, even if it's just a buff that reduces the cost of your next spender. So I don't like the gameplay of it that much. I'd rather just made it flat like the Antorus 4 set, where it would just give you 2 holy power every Judgment instead. The Blessing cooldown reduction one is basically just utility. That feels kind of bad to have to use that if you really, really want frequent Blessing casts, to have to give up a DPS legendary to be able to use. I don't think there'll be any situation that'll be useful, but I mean, I guess we could see.
But that one increases your damage as well, right? At max.
The Blessing one?
Like from Dusk Till Dawn? Am I reading the wrong one here?
Oh, no, I was talking about the Uthis Guard.
Oh, my bad. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Dusk Till Dawn is actually okay. That one's actually... I like the idea of it. I wish that it was tuned so that you were more incentivized to try and get to 5 down to 0, back to 5 down to 0 again, rather than just sort of naturally getting the buff during your rotation anyway, which is basically what it's going to do at the moment. It's not... I wish it was tuned...
At all.
Yeah. You just sort of do your normal rotation, you passively gain a buff sometimes. I think if they made it a higher damage % increase and reduced the duration of the buff, that would probably incentivize you to do that a lot more, and you wouldn't end up with 100% uptime or anything, but you'd be more inclined to try and get that benefit. And I think there's not many people that like the Liedrin's one, because it feels really bad if you have to use all your defensive and utility spells to do damage with your wings, rather than actually get, you know, to use them for utility or healing or defenses. Like you just want to be able to use those for their intended purposes rather than having them to use them to do damage. It's not a great feeling one.
Right.
I don't know what they were thinking with that one, honestly. I really think that they thought that we weren't gonna devolve into legitimately terrible gameplay into that. With that, I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, you know. Is there anything here that is super OP, like cookie cutter? There's nothing else you can use MB? Like, are we looking at something that's just like, it's nice that the other 7 legendaries exist, but we'll never use them?
I mean, I don't know about the general shared legendaries. I think maybe some of those have some potential. I know some people have spoke about like how some of the legendaries that all classes share could actually be really strong, but I'm not certain. I don't see any use case for Legions Fury, even though you could have like a 25 free Holy Power opener or like a 20 Holy Power free opener. Final Verdict can give you pretty insane burst if you get good resets when you're playing Venthyr, because you gain 100% hammer damage, right? And so every one of your finishers having the chance to reset Hammer of Wrath is like kind of insane. Like I think that like maybe has like the biggest potential. But I wouldn't say there's anything that's like outright overpowered, you know, like sort of how rogues, you know, right now they have like Master Assassin's Mantle and Sub has the Shadow Strike one. Like we don't really have anything that are like on those levels of like, hey, this is the legendary you need, right? Like everything's sort of up in the air right now.
Yeah, it definitely used to be Badge, but since that got nerfed twice, we have more options.
Yeah, Badge with Night Fae.
Sorry.
Badge with Night Fae had huge potential, right? Like we were talking like, oh, you know, like if you had enough haste, you can cast a hammer every 3 seconds when autumn's up. Like you can kind of extend wings for like a whole minute, right? Like that had huge potential, but they've nerfed it a lot at this point, and I'm sort of just waiting for them to do like a rework of Badge. Just ditch the whole wings extension thing, because I don't think 4 extra seconds of wings is really going to be worth anything. I'd rather see that legendary become something that revolves around Hammer of Wrath, potentially buffing its execute damage even more, or like widening the execute range that it has, like something like that. The wings extension is like kind of useless on that at this point.
What do you think, Rin?
So at least then, you know, we would have something that buffs our execute, which isn't the worst.
That's it. Any other input you have for the legendaries, or are you just pretty much on board with what they're saying?
Oh, I mean, I don't think it's bad that we don't have one that stands out. I kind of wish, you know, there are some that fill a niche, like Final Verdict. Obviously, you're going to want to use, like, if you're being forced on a melee a lot. If they ever fix Tempest of the Lightbringer, then maybe we'll use that when we need a lot of AoE, but, like, the projection, I don't know what the point of that is. Leodrins, I think even if it's good, it's so terrible to use that we won't use it. That's another one that confuses me. And then, let's see. Yeah, Dusk Till Dawn, I think could be cool if it actually affected our gameplay. And then I do like the Magistrate's Judgment, which is the judgment reduces holy power cost over something like Lucid Dreams, which refunds holy power and kind of can, if you're lagging at all, or if anything is going wrong, you know, sometimes you don't get that holy power refund right away. So I do prefer like a reduced cost over a refund. I like it personally, but I don't know. I think all of them have potential, and I hope we don't get one that's so good that we just use it for 2 years.
Okay.
So I'm overall like, some of them are really boring, but I think it's better than just being locked into the same playstyle for a whole expansion.
Is Tempest supposed to, like, okay, if it, in an ideal world, if it was obviously not buggy, is the projection supposed to be an extra 5 targets hit? Like, does that increase your cap to 10?
I don't think so. We don't think so.
It's not what it did in Legion, so
what's the point?
I'm pretty yeah.
Exactly.
Outside of the 20% buff, that is.
Exactly.
I think that is the point.
Exactly what I wrote down is, what is the point of projection if it only hits 5 targets? Like, how often are you fighting something where that 5th target is just out of reach, and is it really equipping? Is it worth equipping a different legendary to hit that 5th target? You know, wouldn't you just be better off positioning yourself better? So I'm not really sure why they're bringing it back if it doesn't do anything for the cap on Divine Storm.
Yeah, then again, would you want, even from a design perspective, to have to use a legendary to get an increased AoE cap? That would also feel kind of bad.
Do they want it or do I want it?
No, I mean, like, it was just kind of like a rhetorical question.
Yeah,
Like, I don't think anybody would want it that way, right?
Also rhetorical, because I think that they would define it. I think that they would be like, here, look at this awesome thing we gave you. It gives you more targets on your Divine Storm. I do feel like they would do that.
Bolas, what do you think of, okay, so it seems that the general consensus is there's some solid legendaries. There's some room to play around with them. We need some bug fixing, shocker, and we need some kind of just general buffs to some of them. But it seems like a lot of them are kind of just poop as well. Is there anything
legendaries?
Yeah. Is there anything you would have, not a lot of them, some of them, is there anything you would have liked to see back as a legendary effect in this expansion that didn't make it in?
I mean, a lot of the stuff, like the old cloak from Legion, got turned into a talent in BFA. So stuff like that you kind of have anyway. The only one that I can think of that I really enjoyed playing with that might not actually function that well as a legendary now is the old version of Liadrins, where it would give you consistent holy power generation every 2.5 or 4 seconds after they nerfed it from Legion. That was a really fun thing to play around with Crusade back then. I don't know if it would function that well with current Crusade with a lot lower max stacks than you used to be able to get. But that's the only one that I can think of that, would have been fun to play with for me personally. Everything else is kind of whatever. Actually, I think most of the legendaries are okay design. It's just like slight tweaks that they need.
Okay. What about you, MB? What do you think? Anything you would have liked to see back? And keep in mind, like to see back, I mean, there's no way like 9.1, 2, 3, whatever won't have, like, they're going to add more legendaries at some point, right? So there's always chance for something else to come back.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of stuff I'd want to see back, I mean, I don't know. I always liked multi-wings. Multi-wings was cool in HFC. That was dope. I liked having like executes with judgment in Antorus. I thought that was cool too. Like a build that pretty much like made us high prioritize judgment was like sick, and legendary could do that with any of our builders would probably be really cool. The High Lord's Ring that gives you another talent option was also a really good one. Playing Divine Purpose and Crusade felt really good, and I think if they really wanted to retcon stuff, and they could make us have Sanctified Wrath and Crusade at the same time. Yeah, just a thought. So yeah, that's really it. I don't think there's anything that like I'd die to have, or anything like that.
What about you, Rin?
I mean, we have been kind of fortunate where a lot of stuff that is popular has just been brought back in some way. So I don't really have much else to add there.
Okay. That's fun. All right. So we've fed into all the red info we can, and we started this discussion with just kind of getting an overview of Ret core gameplay of the spec, etc. What it's perhaps lacking, what it needs to have, where it excels, if anywhere, and what it needs rather to kind of put it more on the top, have it not be memed, etc. Now that we've gone through all of the SL systems, the things that are coming in, conduits, legendaries, changes, etc. Do you guys feel like all of these compounded systems, etc., have helped Ret outside of its core to help fill in the gaps where the core spec is lacking, like mobility, for instance, or maybe, as you mentioned, Rin, finding a niche for the spec more so? Do you think that SL has kind of filled in some of those holes for Ret and it's moving in a good direction, or are they still lacking? Whoever wants to grab.
Oh, I don't know. Are you asking, like, do just the outside systems like legendaries and covenants, like, do those fill in?
Yeah. Like, do all the conduits and legendaries for Ret, like, does that help fill in those gaps?
I mean, I can't say enough that covenants give us mobility, potentially. Like, that's a big thing, but I have a hard time being enthusiastic about really anything having to do with covenants, especially. So I don't know, maybe I'm not the best person.
Is that just because you don't like like the direction the system's headed, or is it like a red specific thing that you don't like?
I don't know, like for example, I walked into Orbos the other day and I saw all of this like awesome blue stuff on the ground. I was like, what the hell is that? That's so cool. And it was somebody else's Covenant ability, and I was like, how come we don't have anything like that? You know, that's kind of, it's super feely and not really constructive, I don't think, but I do kind of, seems like the grass is greener on the other side.
Or bluer in this case, I suppose.
Blue in this case, yeah. And I don't know what it was, but...
Fair. I mean, Ash and Hallow, you fill an entire room with red goo.
Cool.
Make mechanics really visible.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Bolas, what do you think? Do these system changes help patch in any issues that, in your opinion, exist with Ret?
Yeah, like Bryn mentioned, the mobility stuff, that is a big help. But like I said earlier, I think it's a case of it feels like we lost more than we gained moving into Shadowlands. Just as, like, even I didn't mention earlier, Wolverine did, but the Greater Blessings going away, that felt like a really big hit, especially because Wisdom is quite good raid utility, and I don't really understand why they got rid of it, whether it was like a trying to make all Paladin specs sort of have universal utility rather than just one of them have like this weird specific thing. But that was a big hit in my opinion, and I'm pretty annoyed that they got rid of it. It just feels like some of the Covenant and Legendary stuff fills some niches that we kind of needed with the mobility, but on the whole, we lost a lot more than we gained going into the expansion.
Yeah, and when that's like the best thing we kind of have to say is like, we gain mobility and everything else is just another damage button, you know?
Yep.
I don't know.
Did they ever say why they got rid of Greater Blessings? Or was it just
I don't believe so.
I
haven't
don't know.
seen anything about it.
Felt like it. I think they weren't really impactful enough for it to make sense either that they took it out. I don't understand.
MB, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the systems that they introduced in Shadowlands, I think, can help in some ways, right? Like, there's their abilities put in, or their conduits put in place that help us out with, some stuff like, give us speed, can help our utility out more with sack. The Blade of Justice one gives us range on Blade of Justice, and if we're that slow that we're fucking chasing a mob, like we have a ranged Templar's Verdict now with that Final Verdict legendary, and we have more range on Blade of Justice. But looking at like utility as a whole, I definitely think they took away from it. I think the additions that they made to the class took away from a lot too. I think there was a lot of potential, as they mentioned, with Greater Blessings, but I think to a certain extent, like at what point when you make kings very useful does it become outright broken, right? As an absorb, and same thing with Wisdom, right? Like having mana intensive healers being able to go being able to have like a limitless mana pool from having a Wisdom, like seems kind of broken to me.
Is that any different than Innovate though? Like Innovate's already still a thing, right?
Yeah, but that one has a duration, right? There's like a 10
but like
duration.
I think Innovate's arguably even better, where they can just within that window just spam as much healing as they want, and it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. Over the course of a fight, I think Wisdom mattered, but like they weren't very impactful, so I'm not too sad that they're gone. It's just weird that they ended up getting rid of them as a whole.
I don't care about Kings, just to be clear. Kings was like basically did nothing. Wisdom was the big one that I'm just annoyed that they got rid of, when this doesn't seem to be any reason to do it.
Yeah, why was it targeted if it should have been, under the radar? I also, I don't think we talked about how weird Blessing of Seasons is from Night Fae. We can maybe sneak that in as part of the conversation.
Any part of it particularly, or just like all four, like just how it functions?
Just so at the beginning of Legion they took out Blessing of Might because they were like, well, it feels weird that you're attributing, like, your damage comes from somebody else, right? Obviously they care less about that now with like certain buffs coming back, but like we're at least Might, you only put that on one person really at the beginning of a fight, and then Seasons now you have to like think about who you're going to put it on every 30 seconds. So that is confusing, or sorry, 45 seconds. That's confusing to me. Also, I don't think we really touched upon how weird Seasons is. Like the which one is the damage one?
Summer.
RPPM.
Winter or what?
Yeah, summer.
Well, winter does
you're
damage
gonna have
too,
to
not a lot.
Yeah, does it though? Summer, you're gonna have to figure out who you want to put it on, right? You'll probably put that on the same person for the whole fight. The CDR one, I would love to keep it on myself, but like, am I actually gonna do that? And then winter, like, cool, I guess it reduces the move speed and attack speed of a target, which is like kind of cool. But then like, you're gonna have to figure out which healer is putting out a throughput cooldown and when for the one that buffs healing by 10%, or maybe you want your tank to take 20% more healing or whatever it is. So like, it's cool, but also like having to make a decision every 45 seconds on who to use that on is kind of weird to me. And maybe we just won't take it because it's 45 seconds now, but
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I do think if a bit of it is maybe subjective though in terms of like what's fun to play and what isn't, right? Like I'm always a fan of supporty gameplay, so like I don't mind the whole buff somebody else, but I think I think more to MB's point, I mean they just gutted it so hard at this point that
exactly.
It feels very different playing it as a DPS versus as a tank.
True,
as well.
true. That's
like,
very fair to say.
We're something that should be your big damage ability, you're giving to someone else instead. That isn't a great feeling.
And
Fair.
they already have said, like, they've taken ability, they took Blessing of Might for us for that reason. So I'm just a little bit confused, like, did that perspective on their end change or not? Like, and also, like, am I going to take Night Fae to buff other people over taking Venthyr, for example, to buff myself? And also, like, do a little bit of healing. You know, it just seems, I'm just confused on what their intent is now with stuff like that.
It's I was a big fan of Night Fae. I mean, I still am conceptually. That they have nerfed it just so much, but it's interesting because it's really hard to like fully, you know, you can't just like shove it into Simcraft and there you go because
it's hard to quantify the benefit. You're right.
For sure. It's definitely a good way to put it. But I mean, if they keep going down the road they are with Night Fae, it won't really matter, right? Outside of it's pretty.
And we don't know where it's going to end up. But I didn't want to not talk about it just because it looks like it might be bad right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're here. This is the Ret Paladin, the deepest of dives, right? So it's important to chat about that. Similar to what we were just saying before that, though, in terms of do these systems kind of fill in the gaps, etc. Obviously, not everything is handled, right? Otherwise, you guys would be over the moon right now, and everyone would be coveting Ret Paladins and how good they're going to be, etc. What do you guys think can be, at this point, I suppose, realistically done or added, right? We're like 56, 57 days away from the expansion. What does Ret need? What can Ret get at this point outside of like obviously a complete redesign? Like things like that is just not happening at this point. But MB, what do you think could be a nice quick fix or quick addition that would see Ret in an even better position for SL?
Replace Shield of Vengeance with Divine Protection, number one. That'd be great. Be an amazing change, actually.
And off GC.
Number two, give us Aura Mastery. I think those two would probably be the biggest like initial impact. I think having like a raid-wide CD that's on the level of Devo that, you know, all three DK specs have, you know, it'd be pretty nice to see Retribution gain that. Divine Protection, I just think is a more like a superior CD to Shield of Vengeance. Like in a pinch, Shield of Vengeance is better, but Divine Protection being off GCD and a 20% DR for 8 seconds on a 1 minute CD, like, I mean, I don't think there's very much I can ask for, right? Like it's kind of like a perfect like mini defensive while you're in between wing or bubble uses. Other things that I think that they could bring to the class. Like I said, I'm still hoping for better baseline mobility, like Cavalier going baseline, or even changing Word of Glory to be back to being an AoE heal. But other than that, like other cool things would probably be like GCD removal, like removing the GCD off Horse, off Wings, off Shield of Vengeance, off other utility stuff. You know, would probably be like a welcome change. But my top two are definitely Divine Protection and AM. And those are two big ones.
All right. Bolas, what do you think? What's your wish list?
I think the tiers that Ret tends to really struggle, it's not just an issue of like it has bad utility and stuff like that. It's that it just doesn't perform damage-wise. Stuff like Uldir and Tomb of Sargeras, Ret's damage was just really low relative to other specs. So if they really just want to make Ret okay in Castle Netria, just make sure that it does good damage. Whether that's like just making sure its base damage is okay, or making sure that the style of fights don't make it so you have lots and lots of downtime relative to other melee specs because your ability is not as good as theirs. Just make sure the Ret can do enough damage to compete, and it'll be good enough.
So do you think that even now Ret is in a position where, I guess, if you have the fights stylized for you, not too much mobility, maybe you countered it a bit with Venthy or whatever it may be, you certainly have more smaller CDs outside of your 2 minutes. Do you think Ret could definitely be at that competitive level, especially with a seemingly like pretty solid self-defense / utility toolkit with respect to Nathria?
Yeah, like especially the changes with Final Reckoning stuff. That stuff I think is in a good direction, and as long as they don't gut that completely, it'll probably be fine. Like I think they just need to make sure that the damage isn't tuned super low of the spec as a whole, and that's all they need to do. Like as far as making sure Ret's not unplayable.
Okay. Ren, what do you think? What's your wish list for Ret for Shadowlands? Quick wish list, that is, because we only have 2 months. No, sorry, not quick as in the show needs 10. Quick as in like, we only have
actual like reasonable expectations.
Yeah, because like I said, the expansion's coming out in 2 months, less than 2 months now.
I think really our biggest issue right now is we just haven't. It's like somebody picked us up, was super excited, was like, oh my god, I'm so excited to work on Ret, and then got pulled away to another fire. So I really think if somebody just sits down and goes through everything, then like things will be a lot better. Like stuff like Imperium Power, really cool concept, but probably not. It needs some polish. Stuff like that. I know I had more examples of that, but it seems like there's a lot of little things. And if somebody just sits down and looks and goes through the checklist of all the things that affect our DPS, then we'll be fine. I don't think we need any crazy big changes. Taking stuff off the GCD, like that's, again, somebody just needs to sit down and put in the time and say, can I take a couple things off the GCD to make like a huge impact on the rotation? I know that's not super helpful from like a feedback standpoint, but that it really does feel like somebody just needs to put in the time and like polish up good ideas like Imperium Power and Sanctified Wrath,
So, I mean, just part of the meta issue here that I seem to hear echo chambered in these shows, literally every show now, lack of communication from class direction. Definitely something that has gotten a lot of feedback in terms of, no word, like why did Greater Blessings go away? We have no idea, and really no feedback until it happens, rather than, a preview of what the plans are with Ret and with all these other specs as well. I mean, the reason I kind of approach this like the other ones is because Ret does have that stigma, right? It does have that like lol Ret, wheelchair spec. You guys have your own emotes for it as well. So, there's a reason that people see it this way, but it's not always true. Like the Feral guys, for instance, also felt that it was definitely a misrepresentation or like an over-exaggeration. And it seems like Ret is maybe in that same boat as well. Like it's really not that bad, right?
It really isn't. I think we're just constantly like, I'd say it feels like we're the middle child, maybe not always getting as much attention as we deserve, but really just sticking it through.
Yeah, I don't think it's.
You go ahead. Okay. Ret sees a lot more play than a lot of the other like underplayed melee, like Windwalker or Feral or Enhanced or anything like that. Like Ret, gets taken to world first, top 10 world kills of bosses. Like it's not as dire as those specs are. Mm-hmm. It's still like a playable spec even on the highest end of progression rating.
Yeah, I was pretty much agreeing with Bolas. I think the fact that you see like Rets get world first kills or Rets in top 10s, like top 50 world, top 100 world, like that should be indicative that Ret's not like a horrible class, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of us like to over exaggerate, especially myself. Like to over exaggerate how bad the class is.
But why?
But it's fun. It's fun. Dude, listen. The thing is, people who play OP classes will always find a way to shit on their own class, right? They'll always find problems with it, right? Everybody does that. And sometimes it's just fun to meme with your class and talk about how like you can't function without a wheelchair and stuff like that. Like I don't know. just fun to
Dude,
bag
you have
on your
no
own
idea
class.
how much the rogue Discord complains that their class is unplayable. It's insane.
Crazy.
Unplayable.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Or not viable, another favorite. Yeah, it's I mean, you definitely see Ret like all over the chart. I think Ret sometimes falls, well, technically everything falls in the category of, like Guardian's a great example. People are like, oh, Guardian, they're so bad. And it's like, well, there's like 2 Guardians that did like 5 and 6K Rio score, and I'm like, okay, but that's just like not representative of the full population.
2 guys.
So it feels like Ret kind of gets a bit of that, but to me at least, like from like a raid leading perspective, or just generally, looking at a class's toolkit, right? Like I definitely don't know Ret nearly as well as you guys do, but just looking at it from an outside perspective, like they have some pretty solid stuff to counter Nathria content. We've talked about Nathria, but what about dungeons? Right? We keep coming back to the, like, versus Nathria, perhaps they're actually in a pretty good position, but what about the dungeon content that you guys have seen so far? Where do you think they stand on the totem pole of M+ desirability?
Not great.
Yeah, probably the same as we are like now, or the same as we have in this expansion. I think we're probably gonna be like middle of the pack, not like horrible for M+, like nothing like how Shadow Priest is in like Loki's or something like that. Just off the top of my head, thinking of classes that people would never want, but it's definitely not great from what I've played. So I don't know. Like Sack is useful, Wog is useful, but is it worth it if you don't bring like damage to the group, or if you don't bring Shroud like rogues do to the group? Like I don't know. It's a toss up. I really don't know.
Shroud.
I think part of it, as far as its damage in Mythic Plus, is that basically all of our damage AoE is just Divine Storm in BFA, and it's the same in Shadowlands. Like you have a little bit with some talents that you can pick, but it's not really much outside of that. Whereas in Legion, we had a whole bunch of talents that let us have our Holy Power Generators cleave, stuff like the old version of Zeal or Divine Hammer or Greater Judgment. Like all of that sort of gave us a bit more strength in AoE, where it wasn't just I'm hitting this one button that's going to do a bunch of AoE damage, and having some more sort of variable AoE damage like that coming back would help us a little bit with our damage in Mythic Plus.
All right. Ren, what do you think about Ret v M+?
I haven't done a whole lot of dungeons on the beta, but just like looking at the kit, yeah, I don't see it changing a whole lot. If you have a guild especially, it's really not hard to get Mythic Plus done if you want to do Mythic Plus.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think any of that's going to change going into Shadowlands.
Alrighty. All right, let's field a few questions in here, chat, as usual. If it's something that's been answered already during the show, then you can always go back to the VOD and I'll upload it on YouTube, etc. So then you can just check the answer there. I don't want to take up time to have to repeat what we said. Otherwise, I'll shoot some questions your guys' ways. Whoever wants to tackle them, or if it's for someone specific, I'll mention it. But what do you guys think? First question: how does Ret feel about multi-speccing the Covenant choice?
Wait, what does that mean?
Like multi-speccing, if you were to
like
play
the impact of your pick on do other specs.
Yes,
Paladin.
yeah. If you were to play Prot or Holy at any point, do you feel that you get completely screwed by being pigeonholed into one Covenant is Ret, and then you're like, oh, well, now I can't play Prot and Holy properly?
I mean, I only play Ret on my Valley, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
Same.
As somebody
I've been
who
playing Red exclusively for like 10 years, so.
As somebody who heals in PvP as Holy and does keys from time to time as Holy, it's definitely bad. I feel like it was definitely a bad move for them to say that, hey, guess what? Like your off specs are only going to be 80% as good as other people who play that as their main spec. Like I definitely don't think that that's the design philosophy they should have. I think if I swap to Holy, I should have 100% of the viable available kit available to that spec, right? Like let's say I commit to having Ashen Hollow, and like they decide to fix Divine Toll for Holy, and Divine Toll is nuts for Holy out of nowhere. Like it's gonna feel horrible trying to heal keys knowing that you're at some type of disadvantage that you can't do anything about. I think it's definitely like I'm not a fan of it at all.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can't find many who are. I think most people that haven't spoken up for, I mean, I think, I don't want to dive down this rabbit hole right now because we'll be here forever. I think at least the people in this call right now, we're all pretty much on the same page of, Force Covenant choice with player power, not exactly the greatest thing. But,
I understand their reasoning behind it. I just don't agree with their reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Like that's
like
just,
so many things with Blizzard.
That's just kind of the way it is. There's definitely some people who appreciate the choice, but I think there's just a large unspoken audience that hasn't experienced it yet. And I think views will change, not for the best, when the expansion goes live. We'll see though.
Definitely. I have a big issue with like people who are just playing the game casually, looking at covenants and just picking what's cool, not even knowing soulbinds exist and not necessarily knowing that how big of an impact that has on like the next 2 years that you play the game. So I think that's also worth mentioning, but that's off topic.
Right. No, I think that's fair. Do you guys think you're also affected? We kind of touched on this earlier, but is Ret also affected by the why bring X when you can bring the example given here was Havoc Demon Hunter, but you know where that's going basically. Do you guys think that your ability to be brought to raids M+ is jeopardized heavily by the amount of futility or buffs or debuffs that other melee classes bring?
More than it has been, but definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Looking at just let's look at it from like a very simple perspective, right? Like just from Wings. Wings is like one of the most powerful 2-minute CDs in the game, or like one of the most powerful CDs in general in the game. But we're pretty much overshadowed by the fact that a class like Fire Mage exists. And that's because they have the advantage of using their single target CD to spread their AoE damage down, right? Like if we use Wings, we're committing to either AoEing or single target. We don't get the option of having both like Fire Mage does. And I think to a certain extent, like the why bring X when we could bring Y thing definitely is applicable to this. Like they're just classes that do the same thing that we do, just like way better, right? Like why would you bring, like if you have the option of bringing a Ret Paladin versus a Mage to keys, like who are you going to take realistically, right? Like Mages can blow up big mobs while we can blow up everything evenly, or blow up one guy, and then everything else is still alive.
It's interesting to me that you keep, like when we've had this discussion, you keep mentioning a ranged class Ret rather than versus Ret than a like the melee spot jeopardy. Is that just because you think mages feel like you're saying it's just because mages are basically Ret paladins at ranged that do it a bit better?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the fact that it makes like they're a range class definitely makes them better, like in pretty much every aspect. Like in certain scenarios, you're pretty limited to like how many range you could bring. Like looking back on raid fights, like what was the last raid fight where you had to limit the amount of range players you brought? Maybe like Gul'dan, because like Gul'dan was the only one where you need a minimum of range players, and then after that, like it's literally just an easier fight just to bring melee than having range, because then you have 4 range players deal with every mechanic, and melee just sit there attacking the boss. Like there's not many other scenarios past that, right? So being a range is definitely a big advantage. Yeah.
No, for sure. But I mean, if you've played with some of the range players I do, then you might consider that. But
we're ignoring the whole like bring the person, not the
bring the player, not the class.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at
it. Is what you should do, but is a less interesting discussion.
Sure. Noted. Matt Late. Do you think it's weird, Bolas, I'll throw this one to you. Do you think it's weird that 2 of the Ret legendaries, in quotation marks, really feel like general Paladin legendaries? Basically, 2 of the Ret legendaries can be used for any of the Paladin specs, whereas Ret can't double dip on any of the other specs.
Are you talking about the Relentless Inquisitor one and the Hammer of Wrath Extending Wings one?
Correct.
I think it's the Hammer of Wrath Extending Wings one. I'm okay with that being like a cross spec one because it's a lot. Well, at least it was a lot better for Ret than the other ones. I'm kind of fine with it if that one just happens to be cross applicable. Relentless Inquisitor is just, like we mentioned earlier. They should have just put a different legendary design, something new instead of that one. It's just not a good legendary design. I hope it gets replaced with something else, or when new legendaries come out, that they pick a bit more of an inspired design for it. I don't mind that they're cross spec applicable, and I guess it would have been cool if something from Prot Holy we could use, but I don't really mind. It's not that big of a deal.
All right, fair. I just lost my footing here. Oh, right. We talked a bit about this earlier. Curious on your guys' thoughts. So we obviously all kind of bitched and complained about Red Aura being awful. What do you think could be done with Red Aura? Like, where would you like to see Red Aura go, MB? Why don't you start us off?
Well, like I said before, I'd like to see it still be something that's like something that's nice to bring to a raid, but not required, right? Because we already have one that's required with Devo. So potentially making it something that, you know, is more transformative and more beneficial to your raid. So let's say somebody dies, you know, everybody in your raid gets a small damage boost, like maybe like, I don't know, 2%, 1% for like 8 seconds, something like that, right? That's something that you would notice a benefit during progression, especially on fights where people start melting, right? Like Gahoon is probably something where you could see a lot of benefit for that, where people are just slowly dying over the course of the fight. Same things with fights like even N'Zoth, right? Like you just have random deaths occur in the last phase for no reason. And having a benefit like that is nice, but it's not absolutely required that you need something like that. Depending on the tuning, of course, right? It could be tuned absolutely insane and you could start having people sacrifice themselves just because you know that the benefit to your raid is a lot bigger. But that's like one type of direction I'd like to see the ability go into. Give it more something that benefits your group rather than something that's more selfish and just benefits yourself.
Okay.
Even if it's a damage reduction instead, like, cool. That's cooler than what it is now.
Yeah, it would feel weird it being like an actual raid damage buff, at least all the time. I wouldn't mind the on death thing, like MB said, but having, I don't know, some kind of redesign to make it less sort of
useless
abusable would be great. Well, yeah, useless and also abusable, like at the same time.
And this is assuming that they want to keep it tied to a death. You know, ideally it's something like a thorns or whatever. I don't like having things tied to people taking damage or dying, but if that's what it has to be, then certainly something that like helps your raid out would be better.
All right. What are your guys' thoughts on talenting Seraphim? Wait, let me read this because there's a couple typos here. Thoughts on basically making Seraphim bake into Wake of Ashes and no longer having it gain holy power.
I think I know who typed that. It kind of wouldn't really work as far as the Pally talent row thing is like a cross Pally thing, right? So I don't think they'd do that change just because they wouldn't want to have the same talents work differently for each Paladin spec. Like, I think it's a cool idea, and it would reduce the number of GCDs you'd have to use, and it would actually work for the spec really well. But I don't think they'll do it just because, like, it'd mean they have to have different talents do different things.
Alternatively, just take Seraphim off the GCD.
Yeah, that'd also be just as good.
I think I don't think that's a good change at all. I'm not a big fan of it. Reducing GCDs is cool in concept, but the idea is typically that you put up Seraphim first, and then you'd spend Wake of Ashes inside that Seraphim window, right? Spending your Seraphim just like, spending your Wake just to put up that buff and then not really gain any real big damage benefit from it is like, I don't know.
I assume the idea would be like, instead of gaining holy power, it would put the Seraphim buff up before the Wake.
No, yeah.
Right?
I mean,
that would make sense.
I don't know how it would work mechanically, but I'd rather put up, like, I'm much more comfortable with putting up my Seraphim and then, going to town, spending Wake, and then having all my big CDs for that window, right? It's sort of how you play with Final Reckoning now. You put up Seraphim before you do anything else inside that window.
Yeah, I think probably the goal here was just to do one of the old combine two abilities to save a GCD thing, which is, as Rin
and
mentioned.
And the keybind.
Yeah, and a keybind tree. Yeah,
please save my keybinds.
There are a ton of keybinds on Ret. It's true. I started running out of my own keybinds, and I have quite a bit.
I'm going to get a foot pedal.
Okay.
Yeah,
do what you gotta do. Do you guys think... we touched on this a bit, obviously, but do you guys think Ret should be first in line for a proper rework? Now, but like at some point this expansion, or is it just the core of the spec is good, but we just need some love in some areas? Bolas, what do you think?
I don't think it needs a rework. I think I would appreciate some changes as we go through the expansion, but it's more of there are a lot of little tweaks that need to happen rather than it needs an entire overhaul. Like the base of the spec still functions pretty well, like by itself. You don't need to fundamentally change holy power or the way that our builders and spenders work. I think the biggest thing that might need to get looked at long term is that a lot of our holy power builders are just sort of do damage, deal holy power. Deal damage, gain holy power, and don't really do much outside of that. So you just basically end up pressing a bunch of abilities on cooldown in priority, and they all just do basically the same thing. And that's the only thing that I think might need to get looked at long term, is to make it a bit more interactive or interesting than just I press Blade Justice, now I press Judgment, now I press Crusader Strike, they all just gain holy power.
Okay. What do you think, Ren?
What percentage of our damage right now is just Templar's Verdict? It's like 30-40% or something ridiculous, right?
Yep.
I think it's above 40, yeah.
Which means like everything that you're doing outside of that, offensive cooldowns aside, does it matter? Our melee attacks are like our third highest damage or something outside of, just talking about regular rotation, not during wings or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean that's just kind of like a numbers balance game. But do you think class functionality, like, does it need a redesign? Does it need a new resource system, etc., or is it just
No.
No.
MB,
what do you think?
No, this is just talking about like maybe what it would feel better if the I guess the order in which you press your buttons actually matters, instead of just like literally keyboard smashing and consuming as much holy power as you can build. Is maybe not the best. But
for what it's worth, there's a ton of classes and specs right now in beta that have this Ret syndrome, let's say. It's not really Ret syndrome, but where it's like you look at their breakdown and it's like one ability or two abilities, like 50% of their damage. It's a bit nuts right now. MB, what do you think about redesign? It needs or not needs?
I don't think like the class needs a complete redesign. Maybe just like I don't know what to say for it, like a fresh coat of paint, like the way damage distribution works for like Ret's abilities feels really poor. And the fact that maybe there's like two critical things that I'd like to change. Another one being that we don't have any AoE outside of like Consecrate, I guess, but Divine Storm, that's like anything impactful. And the class, like, the one thing that maybe would require a rework to change, I don't know, maybe it would be something that they should just explore, is the fact that the class doesn't like really bring any cleave, right? So a lot of classes, they have like a specialization in the fact that they can do AoE damage while doing practically pure single, and they gain maybe like a 5 to like 8% loss in terms of like single target damage. If like Ret wants to trade off using Templar's Verdict and swap off to using Divine Storm, you're taking like, I don't know, some like crazy number in terms of like a single target damage hit, right? So that's like the only thing I would want to see them, like the only reason I'd want to see them explore like a rework for. Otherwise, like I don't think it's really necessary. It's just like, it'd be nice to have.
Okay. What do you guys think about Long Arm of the Law benefiting PvE as well? I feel the mobility is also a PvE issue, not only PvP, as we know. So basically, do you think Long Arm of the Law in PvE would be a welcome addition?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, why not? Bring it back.
I think every PvPer would love it. I think it'd be more than welcome in PvE. I mean, I sort of wish they would bring back a dedicated mobility tree like we used to have in MoP. That'd be kind of cool.
All right. Just looking here. Oh, these are just suggestions on Red Aura. Everyone hates Red Aura. Why do all Paladin specializations get Shield of the Righteous when the Retribution Holy Power spenders still require a two-handed weapon?
Because they felt like it.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
What do you guys think about bringing back the old Guardian of Ancient Kings from Kata? I don't know if you guys played back in Kata, actually.
Oh, I love Goldar. The best. Gameplay wise? Cool. It would just play to our burst, right?
Yeah, they're basically saying, having an extra CD that's longer than Avenging Wrath and lining them up. But I guess this kind of feeds into the, like, what we just complained about, Holy Avenger, for instance, now being a 3-minute cooldown, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on, like, how much of an impact that cooldown has, and if they were to fix the functionality of it. I think Guardian of the Ancient Kings was a cool ability. It gave a really cool passive and, like, visually was pleasing. But that minion you got, like, he did not function correctly. Like, I don't know if people remember, but that dude would just straight up not auto attack sometimes, or like you just sit there and do nothing. Yeah, he would hit random mobs. Like, you just stand on his own, just like vibing in a corner somewhere. Like, I'd be interested to see it come back, but I'm not too excited. and I would hope that if they brought it back, it would function correctly.
All right. All right, 3 questions left because I know a couple of you guys got to head off, and we're running at that time right now. So 3 more questions here. What do you think about making Ret a more consistent DPS spec out of wings / out of the shorter CDs we just talked about? Because Ret is not bringing anything outside of wings, is the feeling, due to other classes having better cooldowns and more frequent access to sustain damage. What is really the Ret niche is the question. So basically, do you want Ret to be a bit more sustained?
I'd like to have the option. Like, I think one of the things that Ret can be really strong with, at least it has been sometimes in the past, is it's quite modular. You're able to adjust your build for different situations, depending if you need more burst or you need more sustain or all that kind of stuff. I don't like it only being burst oriented. It's not a great feeling when that's all you can do, that's your niche, and you're not even particularly good at that niche. But if it was sort of like a more of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing, where you could have that sustain as an option, even if it's not quite as good as, you know, the best classes sustain, that'd be cool to have that as a thing that's available to you.
All right. What do you think, Red? /MB.
I like being more bursty, but I also like I raid lead and have some other like limitations. So I kind of do like that there's a window where like, okay, if I really focus, I can make a big impact, and you know, then the rest of the time I'm not hurt as much if I'm like, you know, watching Ding Dong number 7 run into fire and trying to stop that.
Of course.
But that's purely just a me thing.
Goddamn Ding Dong number 7. MV, what do you think? Sustain versus burst niche.
I mean, I think both of them have like their proper windows, right? Like, people love the fact that Fury Warrior is like pretty consistent in terms of like their damage output because of how short the CD of Siegebreaker is. So you have like a pretty decent burst of damage every 30 seconds. And I think people really like the concept of Demon Hunter too, right? being so short and gaining an insane amount of haste for a short window. Like, consistent damage is always welcomed, and I'd welcome it too. But I'd like it to be like an option. I'd like to have the option of being like, you know, I'd like to have the option of being burst guy and then have the option of being, you know, sustain guy. I think it'd be kind of cool to explore those 2 options because they both have their own places.
Alrighty. 2 more questions here. So what do you think of getting, if you thought we were going to avoid this question, obviously not. What do you think of getting seals back in the form of either legendaries or just made baseline as part of the class rework for Ret? Seal talk.
Isn't there a Conduit that kind of does that?
Yeah, kind
of.
You
mean like actual like buffs?
No, like seal swapping back, etc. Just having seals as a like Ret thing, as an example. What do you think of seals coming back?
I'm not a big fan of seal swapping or like, you know, twisting, whatever that kind of gameplay was. That's not really a thing that I really like. I don't know how you guys feel though.
I mean, I remember being a young Red Pally and being told about seals, and I'm like, wait, I just click this one thing and then it's just there all the time. Then why is it there? Why don't they just give us that? And that's still how I feel about seals. But I don't know if that's a popular opinion or not.
Well, that's 2 nay so far for seals. What do you think, MB?
So, okay. So looking at like classic iteration of seals or like BC where you put up a buff and then spend it on judgment, dude, that stuff is lame, man. These classic boomers get out. Get out right now. Like, I don't see the reason for it. The other like more modern versions where it was just a passive buff were like really boring to play with. I can't believe anybody would be a fan of those. But I do think that seals could have a place if they were more transformative to how the spec is played, right? Like, could you imagine having like a seal that allowed you to do pure single target, and then a seal that maybe transformed your abilities to do more cleave? So let's say, you know,
like Blade Flurry.
Yeah. Well, not even just Blade Flurry. Like, let's say this, you put on a seal of the Righteous or whatever the AoE one was called, and then it pretty much transforms your abilities to do like 20% less single target damage, but it does cleave damage. So now you have the potential to do spread target cleave while focusing on pure single target, and at some point, like, you know, it becomes worth it to sit in that type of stance, right? And you feel your abilities actively doing more cleave damage. Or even having a seal that makes you more defensive. Maybe let you leech healing, maybe give you like a passive DR, but you do less damage while you're inside that seal. Like, it could definitely be useful for a lot of PvP situations, I imagine. And like for constant raid damage, it could even be useful for PvE. Stuff that's like more transformative is what I would want to see sealed become. Not like some buff that you put up just to spend immediately after and put back up again, or like just something that leaves passive. Like that stuff's kind of lame.
So maybe use seals as the excuse to flip between sustain and burst and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would definitely be a lot cooler.
Well, yeah, maybe. I'm actually kind of surprised to a certain extent some form of seals didn't come back in the quote-unquote great pruning, but maybe in 10.0. We'll see. Final question. This one not usually, this one comes from me. If Covenants didn't have any player power tied behind them, like just purely cosmetic and thematic and lore and all that kind of stuff, what would you choose? Bolas?
I'd probably pick Nightfade, because I think it looks cool. I don't know, I like the sort of lore behind it and like the aesthetic of it. It's probably a bit weird for a Pele, but yeah, that's the one I'd pick.
Okay, furry lover. Ren, what do you think?
Oh my god.
Well, that's what I want to say.
I'm just kidding. Judgment-free zone. That actually was not an intended pun, but oops.
Kyrian I don't like, which I've expressed more than once. I think they're a cult. Not vibing with that. Sorry, Uther. Not super into vampire parties. Necrolords are chill, but also not my aesthetic. I guess I'm a furry then. So I like the Night Fae aesthetic, but I don't tend to pick stuff based on that. But if I had to, Night Fae.
Well, I mean, just in an aesthetic-only world, right? Night Fae. Night Fae has great aesthetics, all of it.
I'd prefer that, obviously, but Night Fae, yeah.
All right. MB? It looks like you're deep in thought on this one. You've been thinking about this all night, man.
No. I mean, ever since they announced it, I've pretty much been like Ventir Gang or Necrolord Gang. I think those two like definitely have like the best aesthetic personally for any of them, even if they don't match like the Paladin theme. I think like the dark red and like the gray and like teal colors are like absolutely insane. I like the Mogs a lot for them, and the back attachments look insane too for them. Like you carry a tombstone on your back as Ventir. Like I don't know. I think the Night Fae and like Bastion are like lackluster, kind of weak, like in my opinion. So those are the two. One of those.
All right.
I won't justify my decision.
Decide what you want.
Honestly, I'll agree that Kyrian are a cult.
Kyrian suck.
Oh, I mean, we know that. They're also thematically the biggest match to Paladin, technically speaking.
Which also probably are part of the cult.
Yeah, okay, fair. Alrighty, guys. I don't know. I think Bolas, you have to head off really soon, right? For work and stuff.
Yep.
So, nonetheless, perfect timing. We just wrapped everything up. So the last thing, just before we head off here, is I always ask any final or parting thoughts. Could be anything. Could be just a word to Blizzard. Please do this. Just a note about Ret to the community. Whatever you want. Feel free to just spill out some parting thoughts here, MB.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any developer's going to watch this, but there's been so much feedback in the Paladin thread. Like, it's actually crazy. I think it's over, like, 350 responses. There's always discussion going on in Pally Discord, and, like, even if they wanted to reach out to me personally, like, I could put them in touch with, like, high-rated PvPers, high-rated PvEers. I can put them in touch with, like, key guys, put them in touch with, like, super casual guys. Like, if they ever wanted to reach out for feedback, like, you know, like you could literally find me anywhere, or you can just refer back to the threads. I mean, there's so many people that are posting feedback into the Covenant thread and into the like just the general Paladin thread. Like, I don't know, the feedback's out there. I just hope that they read it. Like, I only want the best for my class, right? Like, I want my class to remain being fun as it's been since MOP. So, yeah, I hope to keep it that way.
Okay, Ren.
I mean, if we're talking to developers, like, honestly, like, even if they just reached out to us to tell us what they're looking for feedback on, so it doesn't feel so much like we're just yelling into the void, that would be really nice. And then to the community, I would say, like, if you've stuck it out this expansion and last expansion, you're used to Ret, like, everything is going to be okay. Especially if you already, like it. It's fine to acknowledge faults, but, like, the world is going to keep turning still. It's going to be okay.
True. Bolas, my man. Final thoughts.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot to summarize, but just if Blizzard wants to read our feedback, there's tons and tons and tons of feedback we posted. So just go look at that. I don't know, but it's gonna be fun. Hopefully, like the covenants aren't gonna like flip flop around what's gonna be best, tier by tier. Hopefully, there's just gonna be one consistent one you can pick and not feel bad. But yeah, I'm hesitantly optimistic.
All right, fair.
Well put.
Gal and guys, thank you very much for coming today, by the way, and taking the time, especially on a Sunday. I'm glad we got to make it work. I know it was tough during the week. That's why we didn't do it on Friday. But I appreciate the three of you taking a big chunk out of your Sunday, and, well, you, Bolas, on your Monday. Got to get to work in a second here.
Yep.
To be here. So I hope you have a good day at work. But, guys, thank you very much. And hopefully Ret gets certainly at least some GCD love and some attention that it needs within these last 2 months. And I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts if they do in the future. But thanks a lot for coming.
Yeah, thank you for being able to host this. It's great to have an opportunity to reach out and have more people sort of be aware of the issues that Spec has and what it needs.
And hopefully,
And just talking with people is really fun too.
But believe it or not, human interaction is not bad, especially in these times where we don't have as much of it. All right, guys, thanks a lot. I'll mute up here. You guys are obviously welcome to scatter after that. So thank you again. Been a pleasure. Have a good remainder to your Sunday. Bolas, have a good day at work. And I will catch up with you guys later. All right?
Yep, later.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take it easy. All righty, chat. Another one.